Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 202. So glad you could join me. 202 episodes in the books, and this is going to be a great one coming up. We have Bruce Weigl here. He'll be with us in about 10 minutes, but before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Whatever you can do to help poetry spread around the internet would be greatly appreciated. Now, like I said, we have a great Bruce Weigl is here for the main guest. We also have Ernest Hilbert, who was here for Rattlecast number 121. He'll be here. He has a new book, Storm Swimmer. So after Bruce, in the second hour, we'll be talking to Ernie, too. And so it's a double feature a little bit, a very short segment with a returning guest like we like to do, and then the open line. So if you have a poem you'd like to share, please keep them handy. And one poet I do know has a poem for the prompt that we had this week, which is to write a glossa, was Jayanthi Rangan, because she sent me that already. But she also had, for the first time, the Poets Respond poem this week. And so let's take a look at that. I thought she might be here. Maybe she's not. If you're here, Jayanthi, sign into the Zoom so we can talk to you about it. But let's take a look at her poem, which was Sunday's poem on rattle.com. And the poem is right here. It was... cluster bombs have a quirk. And this was one of the topics that came up a lot this week. This was one of those weeks where I didn't read the news at all. And so I figured out what was going on during the week by virtue of reading Poets Respond submissions. So apparently climate change was a big topic. And apparently the U.S. was selling cluster bombs to the Ukraine. And that was a big topic that people were concerned about, as it should be. And here's Jayanthi now. It looks like she's signing in. And you have to connect the audio too. But it'd be nice if we had Jayanthi here to talk about her poem. Jayanthi, can you unmute yourself and join us? Oh, hey, Jayanthi, can you turn off your stream in the background? You got to just be on the Zoom right now, like the open lines. Okay, great. Yeah, mute that because I can hear myself. There you go. I think it's gone. All right. So, hi, Jayanthi. How you doing? It's great to see you in the earlier segment of the show. How's it going?
Good. Yeah, very excited to be here.
Yeah, so you had the Poets Respond poem this week, which was Cluster Bombs Have a Quirk. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired that poem and how it came to be?
I just happened to see this person that I describe in the poem. It happened while I was waiting to meet up with family members, and then I saw this scene unfold. That this gentleman walked past her, and then came and gave her a hug and. This person was bending, her body was almost bent because it looked like she was feeling very sad. And as soon as this person gave her a hug, which was a brief hug, and he went away. And to me, that was so profound. I stood there and kept on thinking about it. And later on, I added all the scenes and made a poem out of it.
And how did you come from that scene that you witnessed to the issue of cluster bombs being sold to Ukraine?
Okay.
Yeah. What did that connection? Because the beautiful thing about the poem, which we'll have you read in a minute, is that you start there and then and then go a completely different direction, and let us sort of think about the connection between the two. There's a lot of juxtaposition there. So how did that connection appear in your mind?
Okay. I was reading an article about the cluster bombs, and they had diagrams of how a cluster bomb works. And it looked like a very neat package. The whole package had very small bomblets, so to speak. And it also said that the bomblets, they don't all explode at the same time, but some may explode years after the drop. And so that got me thinking. And I was thinking the small things that happen in our day-to-day lives, the stresses that build up in our day-to-day lives are just like those small little bombs, coming together, and then we cannot take it anymore. The stress builds up so much, and then, it comes out. So that's what took me to that.
Yeah, well, it's a powerful poem and a beautiful way to put it. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Okay, I will. One second. Okay, here we go. Cluster bombs have a quirk. The bomblets don't explode all at once, but lurk and layer cyanide on grief. First, my 1996 Hyundai was snagged. Then my routine tension set in of stretching the dollar like a snake's jaw till the next paycheck. My 6-year-old hiccuped his naughty life through his heaving t-shirt. His best friend had found a new best friend. At Lexington Center, I waited for the walk sign. When the light blinked, I did too. Rooted, I heard the traffic roar, and the water table of my eyes vaguely saw a stranger who walked past and then came back. May I give you a hug? I nodded, and he gave. A tourniquet for my disturbed mind, an eye for the walk sign.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little poem there, and I loved especially that of stretching the dollar like a snake's jaw. That's such a great metaphor and such a fresh one. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jayanthi. It's so great to see you in the pages of Rattle.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. And I know you wrote a glossa too, and so we'll see you on the open lines, I think, in a little bit. So Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye. That was Jayanthi Rangan, this week's poet on Poets Respond with Cluster Bombs Have a Quirk. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Bruce Weigl. So sit tight, and I will be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Bruce Weigl. Bruce is the author of over 20 books of poetry, translations, and essays, most recently Among Elms and Ambush. Most of them are from BOA, my favorite hometown press. His other books include On the Shores of Welcome Home and The Abundance of Nothing, which was a finalist for the 2013 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Weigl has won the Lannan Literary Award for Poetry, the Poets Prize from the Academy of American Poets, the Robert Creeley Award, the Cleveland Arts Prize, the Tu Do Chien Kien Award from the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and the 2018 Premiul Tudor Arghezi Prize from the National Museum of Literature in Romania. Having fought in the American War in Vietnam, Bruce Weigl has been working to promote mutual understanding and reconciliation between Vietnam and the U.S. via literature and cultural exchanges for over 20 years. He's the co-translator of 4 Vietnamese-English poetry collections and received a medal for significant contributions from the Vietnam Union of Literature and Arts Associations and the Vietnam Writers Association, who acknowledges his efforts and success in the promotion of Vietnamese literature to the world. He lives in Oberlin, Ohio, and Hanoi, Vietnam. And here he is, Bruce Weigl. Hey, Bruce, how you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you. And it's one of those funny things. I was reading one of your books not too long ago, and I was thinking, gosh, I wish Bruce would send us some poems sometimes. I love Bruce's work. And then a few weeks later, in Submittable, there appeared a couple poems. And so it's great to have you in an issue of Rattle for the first time, and great to have you on the Rattlecast.
I'm proud to be there. Thanks very much.
So why don't you start out with a poem? Do you want to read... Let's see, I think the first one, the oldest one we have is O Atonement. Do you want to start there from The Unraveling Strangeness?
I will. Thank you. O Atonement. Through lonely motel walls, I heard that human ah of pleasure from a woman with a man. I don't remember who I was then, only that I was alive again somehow. So I sat up all that night, grateful for whatever noisy business they could give me. But there was never enough. So I entered the stream and moved then at my ease with the current and the dark shapes of my baggage through a winding journey of a life, until some people murdered the truth. Yet this evening, along roads I have come home to, after the many deaths and the many betrayals, I can watch a giant thunderhead grow and form itself like a living thing into one corner of our flat Ohio sky, and I can say, this is where I'll pray.
Yeah, that is O Atonement, the opening poem to The Unraveling Strangeness, one of the great books by Bruce Weigl, and a great opening poem to that book, too. It really sets the stage, the poems as a kind of prayer and a kind of remembrance. So thanks for starting there, Bruce. Can you go back? So we, you're most well known, of course, as a veteran poet. And can you talk a little bit about how you came into poetry? Where did that take place in your timeline, going back through the history of going to Vietnam, serving there and coming back? When was it that you found poetry?
Yeah, it wasn't until I was never headed in the direction of books. There weren't books in my house. People didn't read books or talk about reading books. But when I went to the war, a friend of mine stole a book out of the high school library, a book of poetry, because it had a poem about World War II, and he wanted me to read it. So he stole the whole book and he sent it to me in Vietnam. And it was James Dickey's selected poems.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the poem that he wanted me to read was the poem, The Firebombing, which is probably one of Dickey's greatest poems, an amazing poem. So that caught my eye. And even before I came home, I think, but especially shortly after I came home, it occurred to me that I might be able to express some of the things that I was having difficulty talking about or even understanding in a poem, like James Dickey had done. So, that began 1,000 failures in a row.
Yeah, well, that's definitely how it works. So, did you think, were you, when you say express yourself in a poem, are you thinking more in terms of expressing yourself, like trying to figure out yourself for yourself, or expressing it for other people so they'd understand the kind of things you've been through?
Yeah, yeah, it's a different kind of self. You're right. It's a qualified self. It's the self that I create that is most appropriately and most powerfully the voice that I need to tell that particular moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And so, is it something though that you were looking for an audience? Like, did you say like people need to hear these stories, or is it something that you're trying to come to terms with yourself, and then it's sort of happenstance that people appreciate the poems too?
Yeah, I'm glad that people appreciate them. I'm grateful for that, but I never intended that. Um, it just was. I think it was too difficult to try to think about that. There was so much else that I had to learn and so much else I had to think about
Mm-hmm.
to write a poem that if I started thinking about the audience, then it was really easy to get lost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, and I think that's especially a danger now because trends these days are so powerful in contemporary American poetry and fiction. Uh, so it's difficult to just choose your subject anymore, like it was possible when I was coming up as a young writer.
Mm-hmm. Well,
But,
let's.
I was the war was a accident of history, but it was also good timing in terms of the arc of my writing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always a paradox in my life,
Yeah.
you and I accept it as a paradox.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
The odd thing is I enlisted to avoid going to Vietnam
Hmm.
because I thought if I enlisted, I could choose a training program that would keep me out of the war, but it didn't work.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I went anyway.
Well, I want to talk more about the trends in poetry you mentioned, but let's hear another poem next. I think the Super from the Unraveling Strangest is the next one you had lined up on page 13. If you want to pull it up, and we'll go there next.
Yeah. Is it okay if I say a few words about this book
Yeah,
before I read
yeah, definitely, please do.
this poem as well? I remembered reading these poems again after we exchanged messages online. That this is the first book that I wrote where I began to realize that writing poems was really solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
So that what I had to do was first get at the heart of what the problem was.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way to put it because it's very true. I mean, they're sort of a non-rational means at solving like psychological problems, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. This is called the Super, and I think that what I just said is clear in this poem. I hope it is. I met the Super on the battleship gray painted stoop of the 5-floor walk-up McDougal Street back when it was neighborhood, and I'd hooked up with a woman who had money from her folks and a job that paid good, and who told me, "Come stay with me, honey." That nearly forgotten summer in the post-war black grief and loss, and all I had to do was sleep up there on the 5th floor with her and love her some nights. We ate dinner together in restaurants. But that first morning, I got there ahead of her and met the Super on the stoop on McDougal Street. I was 20. I had already seen inside the storm of shit, and this woman said with a nasal screech that she was the Super and that I couldn't get in nohow as it wasn't my place. And she called some Puerto Rican young men to her aid when I barely resisted in defense of my stupid rights and of the rights of the not yet arrived woman who expected me. She expected things of me if I were to get this walk-up room to write in, or no, I never wrote. I couldn't write when I heard her breathe at night so close, although there was some loveliness there too, I recall. The tough guys said they'd cut my fucking heart out if I didn't leave the super alone and get the hell back to wherever I was supposed to be. A question, I believe, they had no idea how to answer. I know that I didn't. Later, when the would-be keeper of me finally showed up, the super relented, and later still, once summer had become something we could both bear, we got to talking one evening on the stoop. August, nighttime traffic, and lovers I watched, unworthy, and in the middle of the super's winter story about how the heat went off one night in the place, so she nearly froze and so dragged her chair to the gas stove's open door, propped her tired feet there, and fell hard to sleep. She lifted her dress to show me. Like you, I could hardly believe the scars on her legs from where they'd caught fire, open sores still oozing that human acid, and this 8 months after the fact. Give us back our lives, I say.
Yeah, and that was The Super, once again, from Bruce Weigl's book, The Unraveling Strangeness. And so you mentioned, Bruce, the trends in poetry now and how they've changed. How has poetry changed over the years? I was just talking about this recently, that when we started the Poets Respond series, where we started out here, poetry was not very political. And it was sort of strange that political poetry was something that you'd publish even. There wasn't that much of it. And now it's extremely common. But you sort of, if you talk about poetry of war, that's sort of by default political. So that's there too. But how do you think poetry has changed as far as what you can write about, like you were talking about before?
I like Carolyn Forcher's definition of political poetry, and she says it's poetry that has a design on you. So I like the way that broadens the definition of what a political poem is, because it's not just, of course, limited to writing about political action or political figures or political activity or political history, but it's a way of thinking about the world and about other people. I grew up as a writer in a time that was wide open, a time in which all the doors were knocked down, all the old doors were knocked down, and anything went, as long as it was good. Along the way of my education as a young writer, the canon began to broaden a lot. And as a student, I was exposed to a much more diverse community of writers than the generation before me. And that was all to everyone's benefit. Anyone who had any sense at all realized that the more diverse our literary community, the better for everybody. So, my timing in school was good because that's what was happening at the time. And it had to affect my work. And my exposure to my generation of poets who came up at the same time in a variety of different traditions had to affect my work as well. Today, I have a feeling that the subjects upon which general approbation is most bestowed have narrowed. I don't think it's a bad thing. And I especially think that the inclusion of as wide a variety of voices as possible is a good thing, an important thing, an essential thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that way about formal expression as well, that we should always keep trying something new, something different. I love Pound's idiom there, make it new,
Mm-hmm.
make it new. So I'm all for that kind of experimentation as well. But I think that the writing industry per se has been so quick to grab onto a lot of these new literary expressions that they've forgotten about a whole other body of work that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
That may or may not have anything directly to do with those more important subjects these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to go along with the professionalization of poetry, as Dana Gioia, put it in that essay back in the late '90s. He saw it coming with the MFA programs, where there is this sort of pipeline into poetry, and then certain expectations and styles set in, and then to me too, when I was falling in love with poetry, it was that same '90s era, but it was the poets of the '70s and '80s and '60s that were really pushing the boundaries of things and experimenting and playing and going in a lot of different directions. And in the new formalists too, Mark Jarman was one of my first favorite poets, and just sort of finding those boundaries and pushing against them and playing with it was just the fun of poetry. And there does seem to be a feeling now that there's a way to go about being a poet. You get into these programs and you go through certain things. And I even had, when I was in a MFA program, we had a no rhyming rule in one class, which is just bizarre to even think of. And so I think we do get a sort of a monoculture by virtue of everybody going through the same process of going about becoming a poet. And that is one of the reasons why Rattle's here, is to resist that thing, because we have people from all over the place becoming poets with all sorts of backgrounds and not going through MFA programs. But it does seem like there's a certain one mindset that so many of the submissions come from. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Having one sort of point of view that's sort of a college?
Absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely. And it gives me the opportunity to say that that's what attracted me to Rattle in the first place, was that it seemed like a different kind of place for literature. And I liked what I saw there right away. And I could see that lack of bias. And a kind of openness that I really appreciated. There's such a wide breadth of what you offer, and the criteria is, once again, it just has to be good. That's all. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm talking about. And it's difficult to talk about, especially if you're an old white guy like I am. Without being criticized. But I'm not talking about how anything should be excluded. I'm talking about how everything should be included, and that the problem today seems that things are being excluded for the sake of other things being included. Mm-hmm. It was probably that way in the 50s and maybe even in the early 60s, but in the mid 60s and 70s and 80s, that began to change. And that was part of my experience growing up. So I never felt like we had shortchanged anyone in my literary tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels to me, the first time I noticed that issue, sort of the monoculture perspective, was when I thought about doing a conservative poets issue, because I started seeing a lot of poems from a liberal political perspective, and then and just noticing that there never was a conservative type perspective. Even though I'm not conservative, I still want to hear about, other people's opinions and point of view. And so I asked around if we could do a conservative poets issue. I was looking for people to interview, and I said, hey, could we interview you for a conservative poets issue? I won't even say who it is, because everybody said, oh, I'm not a conservative. Don't put that label on me. So it started around that Bush era. For me anyway, that sense that like, oh, it can't be labeled this way politically, even though it was clear that these poets were conservative, and but it was sort of like felt like career suicide at the time. And I found about a handful of poets that were willing to even be included in an issue like that, and so that's sort of the point where I started seeing that issue come up.
I can't believe Dana Joy wouldn't have taken advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know. Does he even? I think everybody says they're a classical liberal now instead of a
Oh, okay.
conservative, and that's the way they get around it.
I see.
Yeah, but anyway, we should get back to poetry. It is such an interesting topic too. But let's do one more poem from The Unraveling Strangest. Do you want to do a Meeting Mr. Death?
Sure.
It's 68 if you're looking for it.
Yeah, I have it. I'm just thinking about it. You know, this is an old book for me. I published another book, 2 other books since this, and I actually finished another book as well recently. So I'm going back to these after a long time. But I like the way I like what I did with the lines in these poems a lot. Meeting Mr. Death. You could say I kept my cool when I met Mr. Death. I even made him laugh by offering my hand to shake in the bullet-torn morning hours. And then I said, "Are you looking at me?" And he got the joke. Death gets the joke, or else our whole lives are a lie and a waste. He didn't take my hand, but he laughed at my jokes, and he made me feel welcome inside the grace he still wore, shawl of the ghostly angel he had been but could not remember. Mr. Death, he was hanging around some pals of mine, some boys of the unspeakable rapture of war. He could have had me that morning too, when I looked away to the monsoon heavy river where the bodies had come to rest in the last eddies, but he changed his mind.
Yeah, I love that poem, especially for the line, or is it that death gets the joke, or else our whole lives are a lie and a waste? I think there's so much truth in that. It's one of the poems that just stood out from this book a long time ago when I first read it. But you mentioned your line breaks in this poem, and that's one of the things I love too, is the way the attention to detail and the conciseness and the strength of each word and line break and choice. It feels like everything is very intentionally laid out. So what is your thought on the line? How do you decide the shape of a poem, how it's going to appear on the page, and what's that process like of figuring out where the line ends?
Yeah, it usually begins by something that I hear, and that's engaging to me, interesting to me. So I'll write it down, and I'll measure, see what's going on musically there. I always try to have some kind of music driving the poem. But my range of musical possibilities is wide, from everything from free verse to essential syllabic, and everything in between. And I firmly believe that poetry is a musical art, and although it can create narratives, it has to do that musically to be poetry. That's what separates poetry from prose, finally. It doesn't make one better than the other. It just says that one is different than the other. The lyric as opposed to the narrative, the song as opposed to the story. So I'm always thinking about some kind of music. In that book, I remember trying to find a way to merge the music of the sentence with the music of the line. So I think I would start by first arbitrarily breaking the poems almost syntactically. But then going back, and there were places where I didn't like the syntactical breaks, so I would ignore that and do it another way, or how it was originally. So I know I did that with this book a lot. I might have also been counting syllables too. And the interesting thing about English when you count syllables is that there's a given number of accented syllables for any given number of syllables. So, if you choose if you choose 10 syllables or 12 syllables in English, you're going to have 5 stressed syllables, more likely than not. So even though you're just counting syllables, what you're really doing is writing a kind of accentual verse, which is a music that I like a lot in poetry because it's very natural. But it's also a way, though, to, form is there to direct the reader's attention through the poem. And I love the challenge of doing that, but also doing it musically.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a question I've always wondered and never got a chance to ask about, really, I think, is that, so much of, you mentioned the music in poetry, and I've always felt that the difference between poetry and prose is that poetry lives in our breath. Like the reader's actual breath is the medium of poetry, and the writer's manipulating that and getting, us sort of painting on the palette of our lungs the poem. And the interesting thing about English is it's so iambic in the natural way we speak. I mean, like you mentioned about that, the way that the English language has that stressed, unstressed pattern. But you've translated a lot of poems from Vietnamese. Is there a similar thing going on at all in the Vietnamese where you can hear, like, what's the music of a Vietnamese poem? And how is that different from an English poem?
It's maddeningly different.
Yeah.
And so is the entire language. The two most difficult and impossible things about translating from the Vietnamese is, first, it's a highly contextual language, so that a great deal of meaning comes from very small contextual references that are difficult to understand if you don't understand the culture and the history. And the music comes from the fact that it's a language that relies upon diacritics, and there's basically 5 of them. So you could apply 5 different diacritics to the same word, and it means 5 different things. So the music comes from the rhythm of those diacritics, and it's very beautiful. There's a very old rhythm in Vietnamese poetry called luk ba, which means 6/8. And it's 6 of these, what we would call in English, feet, alternating 8. But it's also complicated by the fact that there's a very precise rhyme scheme woven into that metrical form in Vietnamese that makes it the form that it is, the whole that it is. So, the best we can do when I translate from the Vietnamese is to look for accentual forms in English, at least to have that kind of music going that sometimes is not too far off from what the Vietnamese is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it is. It's interesting and such a complicated thing to do. We've interviewed a few translators. I think Art Beck, who we've had a whole series on translation, called it an impertinent duet because you're sort of dancing with the original text, but you don't get to decide where it goes, which is a interesting way to think about it. Let's keep the poems coming and we're moving on to the next book in the series, which is On the Shores of Welcome Home. And yes. I think the first poem you wanted to read from there was The Elephant on page 13. The Elephant. It's a short one.
Okay.
Yeah, The Elephant Gift in the Room. That's the full title.
Thank you. Sun refuses the last nanosecond before night. Stars explode in your cold head. Old nostalgic bombs and rockets. Classic mortar rounds, but no one understands, and no one hears you speak, and no one even sees you standing there in your 62 years, soldier.
Yeah, that was a very short poem, The Elephant Gift in the Room, from On the Shores of Welcome Home, the second to last book from Bruce Weigl. And so what was the difference between this book as you go through, having over 20 books of poetry published and other things? How do you, you're grappling with a lot of the same issues in a lot of the books that you write. How do you know like where one book ends and what begins? And there's a different feel to all the books too. You mentioned, we talked about line length already, but this book has a much longer line. And there's a different sort of feel and take on topics too. So how do you go about these transition shifts that you do from book to book?
When I was an undergraduate at Oberlin, Phil Levine came to visit our creative writing group, our poetry group. He gave a reading, and then afterwards, we got to sit around at his feet and ask questions. I raised my hand. I wanted to know some secret, and I said, "What advice would you have for a young writer?" And he said, "Always make it hard." And I wrote it down in my notebook at the time. And, I loved his poems. And we fell in love with him when he was there. So I took to heart what he said. And as I began to grow and develop as a writer, and as a student of poetry, I began to realize more and more how right he was. That as we work hard and try to get better, we reach certain plateaus, and it's very easy and tempting to stay there because it's easier to do. The work is easier. We figured it out. We figured something out. But his advice at that point is to make it hard all over again, and try something else. So that's what's driven me from book to book. I think one big difference between this book and the previous book is that if you count and listen carefully, this book is much more regular musically. It's either essential syllabic or essential syllabic, with not very many completely free verse poems. But what I like to do is think about the musical line as a range of options instead of as one fixed thing. So that I think that a collection can include, and maybe even should include, a variety of forms. I like the way that forms test us as writers, and it's a way that writers have measured the value of what they're doing for a long time.
And how do you go about deciding where to go next with that? Are you just sort of guided by what's seeming like where you don't want to go almost? Or is it that you come across a new form, you read a poem maybe that you admire and go in that direction? How do you decide how to make it hard?
Many years ago, I figured out an answer to the question that because I didn't want to be coy about it, but I didn't really have an answer when people would ask me, "What do you write about?" And then I read a novel by Milan Kundera, who we lost not too long ago, and from then on, whenever anyone asked me that question, I said that I try to write about the unbearable lightness of being. That's my subject, and it was then, and it still is. That's exactly what I try to write about.
Yeah.
As I understand that metaphor.
Well, that's a great way to put it. Definitely, you can see that in all the poems. Let's do another one. Next on your list, we had what was it next? We had anecdote for the impresario of my brain. If you want to do that one.
Yeah. Anecdote for the impresario of my brain. Please don't judge me on the basis of this. The dead people I see are not happy when they know that I see them. They frowned a strange death mask at me from passing motor cars or in the dimly lit hallways of unfamiliar buildings, like the one where the keeper of records presides. He knows everything about us, but he doesn't know that he is dead. When I ask for my records, he refuses to look at me, so that the darkness gathered in the corners begins to reel outward, exactly like a tiny tornado. If you see this, then you know what the fuck I'm talking about, climbing the ladder. And the rigmarole of other places where the sidewalks are poured in a different paradigm than ours, and the rivers are not interrogated about their direction, and so flow the bright waters straight through you at how it feels later on, back in custody.
Yeah, and that was Anecdote of the Impresario of My Brain. One of those brilliant poems with such a long lines at the end, too. That back in custody, a great turn from On the Shores of Welcome Home. So what is your writing process like? We talked about the it's all based on the music. And how do you write every day? Do you sit down and wait for a sort of a sense of the music that's being played for you somehow internally, and then you follow that? I think I always think of how Billy Collins mentions that it's like he feels like a bloodhound, like following a scent. And do you like sort of follow the sound like a bloodhound would a scent, or how do you go about how do you know a poem's going to start, and how do you go from there?
Yeah, it's a little different lately. The last 6 years, I've been trying to teach myself to write prose fiction. So I've written 6 novel manuscripts and 50 stories. So most of my writing intention has been there, but my radar is never turned off to poems. So they accumulate as well along the way. And then after a while, if I accumulate enough of them, I start to get an idea for the shape of a collection. So I'll work on that in between. And it's a nice break from prose. It's nice to go back and forth. I also paint, and I like to go back and forth to that too. It just takes the pressure off. Writing every day is hard, and painting every day is hard. Writing prose every day is hard, but I think I'm finally figuring some stuff out. With a poem, it's just really is about what I hear, and I love Billy Collins' metaphor, and it is like that. It's like staying on a scent that you pick up, a musical scent. I'm really interested in what's underneath of things as a writer. And I mean that in a literal sense and in a figurative sense as well. But the way that I grew up as a student, especially with a teacher like Charles Simic, was that if you want to find something strange, just look at what's there. That's pretty fucking strange already.
It is.
And, that was a great lesson for me as a writer, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned, moving to prose in your last book, Among Elms in Ambush, is a book of prose poems or prose vignettes is how they're described. And so, what was the transition like to that? And maybe before we do that, though, there's the Tale of the Tortoise is a poem that we have. It's online here at Juxtaprose Magazine. Do you want to read that so we can get a sense of what you're doing in that newer book?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you for asking. So this is the first poem in this manuscript, and it's meant to be a warning or an introduction. I like the word warning better. Tale of the Tortoise. I don't know how the tortoise got in through the fence and past the neighborhood dogs that run loose once the sun is down, but I found her near a nest of her eggs where the garden had already begun to turn to autumn. It seemed she'd found a home there, and who was I to tell her otherwise? So I brought her straw to make a better bed, and food I never saw her eat, but that disappeared from the tin plate where I put it. I don't remember now how long it took, but she kept the eggs warm until they hatched, and her many babies scrambled out in every direction until she rounded them up again into her care. Now I have to tell you that there never was a tortoise, only one that I wanted to be there. There never was a fence to crawl under or neighborhood dogs for someone to step around down the dark alley. There was no dark alley. There was no nest or eggs, no straw, no hope for anything. But I did find a tortoise in my yard one morning where it laid its eggs in a nest it had made with mowed grass. I don't know where she came from, but perhaps she was a neighbor's pet and there was a zoo nearby. I called the police to see if they knew what to do, and they came quickly and confirmed that it was a tortoise with eggs. Sometimes you need to tell a story to fill a hole in your mind, or to try and mend something that's been torn by a violent wave that washed through you once. There was no tortoise and no policeman. I know. I have to stop telling you this. I want you to believe me. It's all about the story. It's all we have.
Yeah, so that was Tale of the Tortoise by Bruce Weigl from Juxtaprose, and then his newest book. So Bruce, you can hear the music in that. And one of the things that people always say, if they're going to be upset about, that I haven't published their poems recently or at all, and that they don't like what they're seeing on Rattle, is it's just prose with line breaks. And I always say, well, if you can't hear the music, I don't know how I can help you. But you can hear the music in that prose. And so why is that a prose poem, and why not add line breaks and make it a poem? I mean, what's the difference between a prose poem and a regular poem, and why take away the line breaks when it's something that we have to aid with the music, and it's musical anyway?
I've been writing prose poems since I was an undergraduate because our teachers at Oberlin encouraged us to do it, and in fact assigned us to write prose poems and exposed us to a lot of really good prose poem writers, both European and American. So I had a real foundation for it, but I still never understood it. And then I went to graduate school, and Charles Simic wrote them as well. But once again, I just couldn't figure out what the form really, really meant. Even though I wrote some myself and even published some, I still didn't know what I was doing when I did it. So several years ago, I went to Appalachian State to teach for a semester. And I had this beautiful mountain cottage and taught just one class and had all the rest of my time for meeting students and writing. So I wanted to try something new, and I got the idea of trying to write a prose poem again. And then, but before I did, I racked my brain a little bit about just what that meant, what that was. And I paid attention, literally to the title. It's a prose poem. So to me, that meant it had to have elements of both of those genres in it, if you're going to call it that. If you're going to call it prose poem, then how can it not have poetic elements of one kind or another? And the same thing is true with prose. How can you call it prose if it doesn't have prosaic elements? So if it has both, then you can call it a prose poem. Well, I started with that presumption. And then what I did was I wrote most of the poems first in lines. And not only in lines, but a lot of them in metrical lines. Sometimes even iambic pentameter lines. But then as I worked on the poems and revised them, I shifted to prose and I ignored the metrical breaks. But the metrical breaks occur within the prose. So that became my idea of what a prose poem was. And then I wrote a bunch of them. And in this book, I tried to pick the ones I thought were the strongest.
And what is it that makes a prose poem one of the strongest? Is there some features that they have in common? And by the way, I'm asking because we have a prompt at the end of every episode for next week, and so a hint for everybody that might be part of the prompt for next week. But so how what makes a good prose poem versus something that might not work as a prose poem?
You know, it's a matter of taste, I think, because there's several different varieties that I admire. You know, I like Russell Edson's poems. They're like little magic boxes.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like Benjamin Péret's prose poems a lot, and I like Charles Baudelaire's prose poems a lot that are very, very different. And Arthur Rimbaud's prose poems, and Robert Bly's, and James Wright's. And they're all so distinctly different. I think, you know, what they have in common is a richness of language and a clarity of thought and a subject that engages. I think that if you can take advantage of two genres within one form, then why not try that? Why not do that? It's an interesting challenge. It's not easy to do. It's easy to do badly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just like metrical poetry. It's easy to write bad metrical poetry. What's hard is to write good metrical poetry, and what's hard to write is good prose poems. I wrote twice as many as there are in this book. That's how many it took to get this book, whether you like it or not. So I tried to take it seriously.
Yeah. And what would you say is the usual practice as far as abandoning poems? Is it 50% work a good ratio for you? Is that typical of regular poems too? Or is that do you abandon more than that or less?
I think anymore I abandon less than that.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be a lot more. I think now I'm more serious about where I start something. I'm not maybe as willing to jump on every flamboyant thing that I could as I was when I was a younger writer. So I don't fail then, therefore, as much. You know, it is one of the things. It's like anything else. The more you do it, hopefully, the better you get at it. If you don't, then it's time to find something else to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's do, if you have any questions, I should say, for Bruce, please leave them in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube. We have a number of questions already that I'll try to pass along a few. But let's hear another poem, Bruce. And I think what we have left, we'll do two more poems. The Long-Term Consequences on page 32 is the next one here, of On the Shores of Welcome Home.
Yes. Let me just say that the reference to Pegasus in the poem, in the title, is on my part not a reference to the Greek version of the story, but to what the military called an operation in Vietnam. And the operation turned out to be pretty famous because it was an operation to relieve the Marines who had been encircled by NVA soldiers at a place called Kien. The problem was so large that an entire division of American soldiers was sent up there, away to the north. It was called the 1st Air Cav Division, which I was a part of. And we only learned later that it was a draw to get us up there while the NVA soldiers moved south to the Central Highlands to begin the Tet Offensive. So that's the allusion to Pegasus here. The long-term consequences of the convoy leading to Pegasus in the fallen world. Or when I packed myself up for the loony bin, I didn't know it was the loony bin at the time, was my lousy problem, and I blame myself for that. And I ended up in a field I know is littered with mines because I've seen it before beside a river named Kalu. If my brain allows me just one memory, one sane moment like the photon bright flashes the doctors held inches from my face brought back a radiant time that no one in the room could know but me, like the field of mines I stood next to on the LZ and walked around more than once and watched a parachute of something drift off target and land almost softly. The lights the doctors flashed in my eyes and the saline they pumped into my veins and the 30 hours without sleep brought that morning right back into the room. And that morning became the day of the longest night of the 7 dead in a single bunker from artillery fired across an invisible line in the dark night of small arms fire along the river and movement in the high grass, voices, radio noise, sometimes even their music, night of the separation of my soul from my body, such a violent tearing I couldn't even feel.
And that was the long-term consequences of the convoy leading to Pegasus and the fallen world. That's our poems from On the Shores of Welcome Home by Bruce Weigl. And Bruce, we talked about this a little bit at the very beginning, but how much, reading the poems, it makes me wonder how much the poetry saved you. I mean, was it something that you had to get out and find? You mentioned poetry as a way to solve problems. What would have happened to you if you didn't have poetry to solve the problems that you had?
Well, of course, I don't know, but I know that my life wouldn't be nearly as fulfilled and fulfilling as it is. I know that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I also wouldn't have learned to look as closely at things as poetry has taught me to look. I do believe that stories save us, though. Our stories save us, and if I consider where I began and think about the neighborhoods where I grew up, literary matters was not where I was headed, and I think that especially coming back from the war, to have the discipline of poetry to devote myself to can certainly be said to have saved me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sort of along those lines too, do you think that you've taught in colleges to students, you've taught veterans, of course, to poetry. Do you think that it's important, as far as becoming a great poet, to have life experiences? Like, would a lot of poets I've talked to would recommend, don't go to an MFA program, go out and live life first, and then have something to write about, and then come back and write and learn how to write when there's that you have stories to tell. But other people say that we have all the stories we need by our teenage years, and so that's plenty. Where do you fall on that continuum? Do you think your best students have been, the people who have lived the most, the hardest lives so far?
Bill Knott told me a story once about a student that he had who sat way in back of the room, and she had long hair and let it fall over her face so you couldn't see her face, and she wore sort of heavy black clothes to kind of hide inside, and it was at a prestigious school. It was at Emerson, and she was among a lot of smart, talented people. But he said the first workshop, it became abundantly clear that no one was anywhere near this woman.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "You always got to watch out for the weirdo in the back."
That's a good story.
He says, "Those are the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
The strange ones who want to hide in the back,
Yeah, it kind of feels like as a gathering of poets is always a gathering of the people who hide in the back, but there's no one left in the room besides for those.
That's right.
So there's a question. Cindy Gore wanted me to talk about this, and I'm not familiar with this. So she says, please talk about your book of poems from captured documents that you and T. Wynn translated.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to teach every summer for 30 years at a place called the William Joyner Center for the Study of War and Social Consequences at University of Massachusetts, Boston, which was directed by a visionary guy named Kevin Bowen. And when I was there one summer in the library, I discovered that there was an archive that the university had purchased, and it was an archive of captured documents. And what we were trained to do as soldiers was anytime anyone found any paper on anybody alive or dead, the first thing to do was take all the paper away and turn it in to whomever, I don't know, to somebody. And it would be put on microfiche and studied, sometimes to see if there was any military value to it. Often there wasn't. Often it was just diaries and stuff like that. So I was looking at this archive one day with a Vietnamese woman and the archivist at the library, and I saw what looked like poems in Vietnamese in these notebooks. So I said, "What is that?" And the Vietnamese woman said, "Well, they're poems." And I said, "Whose poems are these?" She said, "Well, they're the poems that the soldiers wrote." And I said, "Well, why did they write poems?" And she said, "That's what the soldiers did when they missed their families and their loved ones. They wrote poems about them." So I turned to the Vietnamese woman I was with. Her name is Thanh Nguyen. And I said, "Can we do a rough translation?" I knew no Vietnamese at the time. I said, "Can we do a rough translation of one of these poems?" So we spent an hour doing one short poem, and it was exquisitely beautiful to me. And I said, "So now let me get this straight. These poems that are here in this archive, in these notebooks, these are just regular soldiers writing in their notebooks about the war and about their families and about their lovers and about all this stuff, right?" Yeah, that's what it is. So we spent the next 18 months or 2 years translating a book of them and published it as a book called Poems from Captured Documents.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I definitely want to check that out. What was the, were there any common themes besides, that came across? Like what was how similar were the poems between each other?
Well, that's not only between each other, but similar to our poems about being gone, being in the war too. That's what was amazing to encounter these poems, was that I realized maybe for the first time in my life, oh my God, they're just like us. They suffered the same way we suffered.
And is that what triggered your work in sort of bridging the divide between the U.S. and Vietnam?
Yeah, that was the first project that got me interested in Vietnamese poetry, and then I decided to devote myself more seriously to the study of the language so that I could become a more effective co-translator. And I've been doing it for 25 years.
What would you say that you've learned? Is there something that stands out as something you've learned from that experience?
The amazing thing about translating is that you learn more about your own language than you otherwise would learn. Because you're constantly forced into finding the right way to say something in English when you're translating, especially from a highly contextual language like Vietnam. So you're forced to broaden your regard that you have for certain modes of expression, and that's a good thing for your writing. So I think that's the most important thing I've learned.
Well, one last question, and then we'll do one last poem too. But you mentioned sort of making it difficult as being a thing that you try to do as you move through poetry to keep it always, challenge yourself. Is there one form or style of writing that you found the most challenging?
However you look at the form, I'm most challenged by what we call a sonnet, either metrical or otherwise. Even a poem in 14 lines is a very difficult thing to do. It's very challenging to get from point A to point Z in 14 lines. So I like to force myself to try to do that. And I think most of the time it brings out the best.
Yeah, it definitely seems like those, when you challenge yourself, it's when you have the opportunity to rise to the challenge, which makes, that friction makes for a lot of heat.
That's right. Is that your den that you're in, your study?
It's our alternate location in the Woodlands, Texas. But yeah.
Oh, it looks really comfortable.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. So let's close out with one last poem. We have "Crazy with His Anguish" and "Dumb with Grief" is the last poem we had on the list.
Okay, so remember where we began. With the elephant gift in the room. So this is the conclusion to that story. Crazy with his anguish and dumb with grief. The air above the moving water, cool spring air above the moving water. The river comes from where it goes. Stand in the deeply moving river long enough, and you can feel what time is and what time is not. You can be jolted from one way of seeing into a wholly other way of strangers crossing over who don't belong among us. A conspiracy of the dead, you could call them. You could call them a shroud that moves through the room like a tiny black cloud and then disappears, although stranger things have happened. The air above the moving water is cool in spring. I believe in a paradise of words, like the words you find in the great rocks in the river, and the words high in the branches on night wind, and the words that tell a secret kept for so long it can never be forgiven. I believe in the leaves turning up before the storm is even in our sight. In a vacuum, there is no sorrow or longing. Everything they taught us was about living with nothing about how to die. The air above the moving water is cool in the spring. The wheel turns and you're back again to the same place. The less time you have, the more beautiful everything in the world appears.
Yeah, and that was Crazy with His Anguish and Dumb with Grief from On the Shores of Welcome Home by Bruce Weigl. All of Bruce's poems are just lessons in, both in poetry and in humanity. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Bruce. I've been a fan of your work for such a long time. It's really great to meet you in person finally.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate your support.
Yeah, definitely my pleasure. Yeah, thanks again.
So,
so we're going to move on now to, and Bruce, you can stick around if you want or head out, but Ernest Hilbert's going to be on to talk about his newest book, Storm Swimmer. So let's see. Yeah, we'll just do a quick transition. Why don't we just jump right in? I've never figured out how to do, if we should have a full break or if we should just jump right into our bonus poet. But our bonus poet today is Ernest Hilbert, who I mentioned was on Rattlecast number 121, but it was the Halloween episode. Because Ernest has a book of spooky stories of Americana that we talked about back then. We talked about some of his other work too. But he has a new book, Storm Swimmer, that's just out. It won the, I put it on the screen. Or I'll just hold it up, I guess. It won the Vassar Miller Prize in Poetry. It's right here, Storm Swimmer. And here is Ernest Hilbert. Hey, Ernest, how you doing?
Hello. Hi, Tim.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. It's been a bit. It's been like a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years since
Was it? I thought it was just this past
No,
Halloween.
that was episode 121, and we are on 202 now. So time's fun when you're having flies.
Well, yeah, right.
You have kids, which from this book, which is a lot about having being a dad and raising kids in this sort of difficult world that we live in. Just life itself is always going to have challenges. Sure. And that's a lot of what this book is about. But dad, or the kids would appreciate the dad joke there. But tell us what you've been up to in the last, almost 2 years. How have you been?
I can't believe it's been that long. It's so funny. Well, I just got the kiddo to bed. He lost a tooth, so he's pretty excited.
Oh, nice.
It's been a while since he's lost one, so he wanted to look at it under a jeweler's loupe and under a magnifying glass and analyze it. So he's excited. He was excited for that, and it was his first day at camp at the Academy of Natural Sciences, which we call the Dinosaur Museum down on Logan Circle here in Philadelphia, where I'm speaking to you from. Things have been okay. I've got this new book, came out in April, which people seem to like, and which I'm pretty happy with. And I'm keeping busy being a dad, going to work, writing when I can.
That is a good amount of work. So let's do, you mentioned, I could pick whatever poems we wanted to read. And I was looking at there's a opening poem, Storm Swimmer. The title poem starts as a sort of a preface, but then Pelagic is the next poem. I think that sets up the book pretty well. Do you want to read that to start with, and we'll talk more about the book as a whole?
Sure. Which one? The prelude or
the Pelagic, page 5
Pelagic?
there.
Yep.
I don't know if I'm saying that right. That's not a word
I
I know.
Pelagic sounds better, so I'm just going to say
there you go.
way.
I'm sure you're right. But
it's not a word you hear in common conversation.
No, that is the first time I've said that. That's for sure.
And what it means, it's a little bit of a clue of what's to come in the poem, because although the scenario here is, of course, swimming right off the coast, pelagic refers to deep water far from land. So this is Pelagic, the first poem in the book proper. As Tim mentioned, Storm Swimmer is a short poem that serves as a prelude before the first chapter. So this is Pelagic from Storm Swimmer. I face an ocean. Its lurid rush and pull, the same as ever, though I have aged. I step in, small, cool splashes on my calves, then shoulder through hard linebacker waves. I dive beneath a breaker and surface in hissing warm swells, brine on my lips again. I swim a while, then break to breathe and float in foam. A clouded yellow butterfly has trailed me out and veers nearby. It spins and banks above, my body its nearest ground. It lights on my chest, wings unhurriedly closing like bellows. I strive to stay still. It's off, fast as a blink, alive in the sun. I spin over, face down in the lapping amber glass, the pelagic summer roll of original sea, the sandy glint of bubbles climbing in the goggles pane, my arm swiping down in time like a fluke, mottled in swarming undersea light. The breakers roll in to hide the beach from me. I imagine I'm in a world, only ocean and sky, 4 billion years ago, or in a time to come, floating without the earth to save me, as long as I might.
Yeah, and that was Pelagic, I'll say from now on, from Storm Swimmer, one of the early poems in the book. And a surprising, a rare book dealer and a formal poet swimming out in the middle of storms deep into the ocean is not something that I would have expected, especially here in Philadelphia. So how long does that go back, swimming in turbulent waters? And obviously a metaphor for more, but
well, certainly. I mean, you're on the Pacific. I'm on the Atlantic. So I grew up not too far from Philadelphia in South Jersey, near the Pine Barrens, and on the other side of the Pine Barrens is the Barrier Islands and the Atlantic and the bays. And so I grew up going to those beaches my whole life, ever since I was very tiny. There's pictures of me not even a year old on those beaches. And that's pretty rough swimming. That's not easy. I mean, the bays are not really very swimmable, but the ocean tends to throw up really big waves there when you're on the island facing out, because there's nothing between you and Europe or Africa. I mean, it's just straight. So that kind of swimming, you have to get out past the heavy waves to swim at all, if you can. And do that. And I've just done it recently. We do it all the time, because Philadelphia is still, if you time it right, an hour, from we call it the shore. You don't use the word shore in California. You call it the beach, right? Or the coast.
Yeah, we do. We go to the beach.
We call it the shore. Are you going to go down the shore? When you're at the shore, the thing you go onto made of sand is called the beach, but you go to the shore. So no, absolutely. And I love wild swimming when I can, like up in Maine, even in really cold waters. Just park the car and just go in the water as long as you can. It's a little hypothermic. You reach a point where you're almost euphoric, because the cold is reaching a point where you really need to get out. But it feels so good. And my wife and son, they don't want to get in water that cold, but I love that. And so no, I swim as much as I can. I swim almost every day. And here in the city, we swim in the city pools, which is not wild swimming. Well, it's a little wild because it gets a little crowded.
You get an elbow in the face. Yeah.
Everybody's invited, and especially on these hot days, you just have everybody in the city is in these pools. So no, swimming is a really important thing for me, and I spend a lot of time doing it. But the reason it's been turning up in my books, the last few books actually, is because I use it as an analogy for understanding life, if that's not too grand, because you're in an element that is much more powerful than you are, and vastly larger and more ancient. And you can control yourself up to a point using discipline, exertion, a struggle for survival, or you do it for joy and happiness, whatever reason, but you still are only able to control yourself within the whims of this larger thing. So swimming against the tide or against the current of a river is impossible. And you can't, waves can just throw you up on the beach or drown you. And so it is sort of like we do what we can in our lives within the larger element in which we are sustained. So that could be the family, the city you live in, the political system you're in, the economic system you're in, within the larger flow of history. You can only do so much. So you do have some control, but only within the limits of what you can do within that much more powerful medium in which you are suspended. So there's that, and then and beyond that, just sort of there's just something almost magic. I don't know if you do much swimming, but it really is a magical thing. I mean, you feel almost like you're returned to a primordial state if you're in the water long enough. So it's always captured me in that way, and so I wanted to do it. In the first poem, Storm Swimmer is really just about a stoic approach to things, and just expecting nothing, and just preparing yourself and just diving yourself into whatever it is and facing it, whether it's a fear or even a preparation for aging and death or whatever you want to say. That poem ends with the imperative mood, which is dive, which is a command, because it's also written in the second person. And so so that's, I hope that answers some of your questions.
No, it definitely did. And my follow-up too. So the other thing I want to just, how did the book come together? Because you have, how does a book do that? You had, last time we saw you had a book that was out not too long ago, and then you're working on poems. How do you know that you have a book, and how do you know that was going to be the central metaphor? It's such a great metaphor for the book. Did you know that going in? Did you pull together poems, no pun intended, that that fit that, or were you just found yourself always writing about these sort of same themes, and then you realized you had a book once you had them all written? How did the book come together?
Well, when I went on the show, now that you point out, it was nearly a year and a half ago. So we decided to do my 2015 book for the Halloween episode, because that's a little bit darker book. That's Caligulin. And those water poems started appearing in that. And then last one out is the book that came out after that in 2019, where there are more of those. That book also is the first time that I have poems in the final chapter of that book, anticipating my son's arrival, while my wife is pregnant in one of the poems. And then when he's an infant, and he's very small in those poems, he's very tiny. By the time 2023 rolls around, I've been writing poems where he's actually moving around and developing a personality. And I'm starting to feel that fleeting sensation of just like time's getting away from me, where sometimes it feels like, oh, that was another lifetime ago when that happened. But also in a blink of an eye, it seems like everything's just going past me so fast. Like it just happened, or it was also a century ago. And time is completely out of joint. COVID didn't help, because I feel like that was a huge fissure in the way we understand ourselves and society, and history was just this big break, partly literally a break in the sense of everyone just having a chance to stop or having to stop, but also a break with all the history that came before it.
Yeah, I mean, parenting it's a kind of quickening, that's for sure. I mean, I think about when I moved to LA, there were no seasons, because it's LA. There's like, it rains for a day and they call it like the rainy season, and that's all you get. And it played a weird thing in my head where I didn't feel like time was passing, because it was like always the same season, and there's no like way to anchor. But when you have kids, all of a sudden so much stuff is happening. They're changing so fast that it just feels like time is like a rocket launcher. And suddenly, you're 43 and your kids are teenagers, and you're like, what's going on? And and so the book definitely captures some of that feeling too.
Good. I'm glad, because there was a sense of being sort of out of control, and also the level of I'm a sentimental person to begin with, So once you become a parent, you see pictures from a few years ago, and it almost brings a tear to your eye when you see the kid was a few years younger, and oh, do you remember that time they did this? And then the whole thing is like, we got through COVID together as a family, and it was a scary time, and it put you through that as well. So there was a lot of emotion, and most of my poems begin from a place of emotion. They don't come from ideas. I might get a notion for a technique or something like that, or a sound, or something I want to explore. But if there isn't an emotional spark that sort of forces me to do it, I don't do it. There's no demand for my poetry out there where people are saying, come on, let's go, get that assembly line working. We're going to pay you millions of dollars. Yeah. So I think it has to mean something to me in order to do it. And so, I think it was Robert Frost said, no tears in the poet, no tears in the reader. And Allen Ginsberg said that he always wept during his writing his best poems. He was always weeping. That's a bit of an exaggeration, I'm sure, but I have to have that emotional thing, and having a child really, really spurred that in a moment. Any given moment, I'd suddenly freeze it and think, I want to create a monument to this moment and find a way to capture it and share it with other people, make it as universal as possible, whether you have kids or not, whether, it doesn't matter. Because everyone was a kid at some point. So and to try to make it as universal as possible. And so those are the two themes in the book, and they sort of come together in the final poem, Soul Unquiet Thing, where the water and the storm metaphor of being out of control, it combines with the thoughts about having a child, and the child growing away from you, and things like that. So the two are intertwined, and they sort of wind up in that final poem. So you're right, it is both of those things. It's the water imagery, and there's a lot of there are other things in there, which is just about how scary the world can be or how beautiful it can be. There are other things in there. It's not just family and swimming, because that almost sounds boring.
Definitely, that sounds like a big deal. Feels like you're going along for the ride, inside Ernie's heart or something. Yeah, right. That's how it feels. So we got to move on to the open lines in a bit, but let's do one more poem. I don't know if you want to do that last poem, Soul Unquiet Thing, or do you want to do something different?
I was going to do, how about this? Voltage Crackles at the Edge.
Okay, which page is that?
That is on page 17.
Okay.
And that's one of the childhood ones. And that one chapter, I mean, they are interspersed throughout the book, but there is that one solid chapter that is sort of, chapter 2 is all about this sort of thing. So this is a poem that was so difficult to write. I just couldn't finish it, and I couldn't get it published either because I couldn't get it to feel like it was finished because it was too emotional for me. And in any form I tried to read it, I would get choked up, and it was too much. And finally, Jerry Cambridge, who's a great, I don't know if you know him, but he's the editor of The Dark Horse, which is a Scottish transatlantic magazine of poetry and criticism. He's a great editor, and he accepted 2 things. He said, I was thinking of accepting that, but it's not right. I'm like, well, why don't you take it in hand and show me what you would do? Like, really, just finish it for me. Help me get it where I want it to be. And that's how it happened. That I couldn't finish it. The material was too close, too hot for me. I didn't want to be sentimental. You never want to do that. But you want to be honest and tender too. And so, even then, since then, I read at the Westchester Poetry Conference just in June, and I had to stop for a moment because I was getting a little, I didn't literally cry, but you could hear it in my voice. I won't do that tonight. I'm going to be a pro. And afterwards, an actor came up and he said, look, as a writer, if you cry, it denies the audience the chance to do it. I thought
that was a good point. Yeah, that's interesting.
And then Mark Jarman, the keynote speaker, came up and he said, listen, my wife is a singer, and whenever she feels overwhelmed emotionally, she thinks of doing laundry just as a way to keep the precision and the focus on the performance and not let the emotion overwhelm. How do you let the two come together just right? That's a question for another day. But here, I'm going to read this. Voltage crackles at the edge, and the Washington Post Book Club used this. They reprinted it with a little endorsement. They have 220,000 members, so that was a nice jump. And I was so glad that they chose this. It really redeemed my belief that this poem was worth spending years and years working on. I mean, literally, I spent years working on it. So I hope it holds up to the expectations I have now set up for it. It's called Voltage Crackles at the Edge. There's thunder in the sun. So says my son. He says a lot of things he knows must not be true, but wishes that they were. And so do I. Dragons ride in the dump truck. The cat is wearing my coat. The sky is filled with cottage cheese. The doggies row a boat. The baby bear is in the bath. That we'll live forever and always be in love. Right here, like this, with waves that fly out 90 million miles to light up the book we read together. My son's eyes are big. He says we have to whisper or monsters might come in. He's not afraid of ghosts. For him, they're only things that can't be seen. And what is to be feared in that? He thinks that he's a ghost when hiding behind the window curtain, though he cannot resist the giggling fits that give him away and back to us again. We're ghosts. We are. You're right, my little one. We're ghosts, but filled with spirit fire that floats from somewhere else and keeps us here for now. And when we're only ghosts, I know we'll stay in love, like now, because we lived by love and took from love our magic lives. Objects bending time and space, alone with what we love.
Yeah, beautiful poem. That was
Thank you.
Voltage Crackles at the Edge, again from Ernest. Hilbert's new book, Storm Swimmer, which you can find on his website, of course. And Ernest, we didn't even mention formalism somehow, but you can feel, the meter and the. I don't know. Is there a form of that felt like free verse that's actual free verse? It felt like
it is free. You're right. It is free verse, but he uses verse technique freely. It's not regular.
Exactly. Yeah. So there you go. And the whole book, again, as your work always is, just has that strong metrical ear for poetry the whole way through. A pleasure to read, and a pleasure to have you as a guest. It always is. Glad to have you back to see what you're up to now, Ernest.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Yep. Take care, and I hope to see you soon with the next book.
Great. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, once again, that was Ernest Hilbert. His newest book is Storm Swimmer. You can find it on his website, and his website is ernesthilbert.com. Just go to Ernest Hilbert. That's E-R-N-E-S-T. Hilbert is Hilbert.com to find his newest book and all of his previous books and a whole lot of other interesting stuff. So does a lot for poetry in the midst of doing everything else. That was Ernest Hilbert once again, and a great bonus guest. Hope you enjoyed that. Now we're going to go to our open lines, like we always do. And like I did last week, I forgot my slide. So I'm just going to put up the email address right now. So email your poem first to OpenMic. That's openmic@rattle.com. And then follow the Zoom link. I'm going to paste the Zoom link into YouTube and into Facebook, both chat windows. If you have a poem, but only if you have a poem. Jump on the Zoom and share it. There goes the link deployed and pinned to the top. If you just want to listen and enjoy the open lines, though, just sit right where you are, and we will have more poetry. But if you'd like to share a poem, jump on the Zoom right now. It's going to be a 1 poem limit per customer this episode. We definitely, when you have the bonus, there's not all that much time for the open line, so make sure it's 1 poem, maximum 2 pages. But I'm looking forward to the open lines. We have a prompt. You can share whatever you want, though. You can do the prompt poem, which is a glosa, or you could do anything else you'd like, so feel free to share it now. And I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. We have a good group of people here already. We have 14 people on the Zoom. And again, it's going to be a 1 poem minimum, 1 poem maximum as well. The prompt for this week, I'll put on the screen and then tell you I failed. But the prompt for this week was to write a glosa or glossa. I still don't know how to pronounce it. But in her poem, I realized that Diane Seuss pronounced it glosa, so we'll go with glosa. To write a glosa and set in the distant future, to kind of, with a nod to the post-apocalyptic feel of Virgil Suarez's book that we had last week. And so that was the prompt. And I worked on it. I thought I had, a glosa, the form, you take 4 lines from a poet. You quote them as the epigram, and then those are the last lines of 4 stanzas. What I didn't realize for a glosa is that it's 10 lines each, and that's a pretty long poem. So what I tried to do was make I tried to take a Kay Ryan poem, since she has really short lines. I thought, well, that's the quickest way to do a glosa, right? Have really short lines, have like 3 words per line. But then there was one line that she just used it in such a weird way, I realized, that I couldn't figure out a way to get around that line. So that poem is still a work in progress. It's like 2/3 done, but I'm just like stuck at this little hinge of a really strange way of phrasing something that Kay Ryan had. So with 10 minutes to go in the show, I did a quick Hyben, and this was based on a little bit of a story that a poem in one of Bruce Weigl's books reminded me of. And so there's just one line about someone who had a pet wolf, and it reminded me of the time. Well, you'll hear the story really quickly. This is Square Knot. That time Dad asked if we wanted to see a real wolf, and so we piled into the old pickup and headed down the lakeside road to watch it pacing in its little pen while he drank beer on a lawn chair as that lonely creature's silent feet beat their line in the brambles and a single rope held closed the post. And then the haiku. Young artist drawing inside the line she draws. That is my little haibun for today. Hope you enjoyed that, and let's see what you have for your poems. Hopefully, I don't know if I know we have a glossa from Jayanthi. I know Katie Dozier wrote a glossette. So did anyone else complete the full glossa? We will see. Let's jump. Oh, we got some hands raised. Let's go first to Nancy Sobanek. She says she's got one. Hey, Nancy, are you there?
I am.
Hey, I saw your hand raised. So you did manage to pull off the glossa, huh?
I did, but I had the same problem you had. Sometimes the syntax of the line doesn't really fit with what you're trying to say in the previous line. So it's a complicated form.
It is. It's a tough form. And it's just, I didn't want to use it the same way that Kay Ryan did. And so I was kind of like, oh, I'm trapped. Like, how I can't figure out how to get around this little, it was like a little trap. And it was just like waiting there on the path for me to fall into. And then there it was. So what did you, let me pull it up. But so how did you, what did you pick? Who did you pick to start with?
William Blake, Auguries of Innocence. And so mine's a 4 stanzas, 10 lines. I tried to do it in iambic pentameter, which is also sometimes described that way, but that didn't work too well for me. So,
okay, well, I'm going to pull it up on the screen. So it's Climate Change Merges with Dante's Fourth Circle. Very interesting title with the Blake epigram. Let's hear it whenever you're ready. I'll put it over on the screen. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm waiting for it to show up on my screen.
Oh, should I be going to copy? Yeah, I'm sorry, because of the delays and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so Auguries of Innocence by William Blake starts with, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And then there's just a little side note that Dante's fourth circle is avarice or greed. And the poem starts, we grab all we can hold, hoarders and squanderers both. Watch as coal-tinged skeins again and again slip their payload, plink raindrops on scoured bottomlands. We strain, taut as a cow's skull strung with calico roses, determined from where we stand to see a world in a grain of sand. Even the sand is seared, the blast furnace sun bakes a cracked cake. Our craving insatiable, we become gleaners of greenery's former bower, the heartland's severed heads. We are past the signposts, past the critical hour, to see a heaven in a wildflower. To burn or drown, land and air takes turns. We push north on our diaspora, arable soil, potable water, and a top that can keep spinning our jewels of the hinterlands. Bank accounts, cars, houses, all rusted cans without an opener. Stripped of illusion we newly understand, one may only hold infinity in the palm of your hand. Traveling light snips stitches from the frippery of notions we must let go. Many have died, unable to drop their heavy load. Pushing harder will only devour our remaining strength. What's left of time, this season of heat, is the breaking of the circle to regain power and eternity in an hour.
Oh, that was great. I mean, that was the full glossa. You did it. The 10 lines, 4 stanzas, got the whole thing in there. And it's a poet respond poem, too, because everybody is living in Dante's fourth circle right now. So that's a perfect
I was trying to combine, Dante, William Blake, and climate change all in one poem.
He did. Yeah. He definitely did. Great job, Dante. That's an excellent example of the glossa.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Yep. Take care.
Yep.
Yeah. Once again, that was Nancy Sobanek with Climate Change Merges with Dante's Fourth Circle. And let's see. And so we've never used, for some reason, we've never used the hands. But when I mentioned hand raise, now tons of people are raising their hands because they have glosses. And let's go to Laura Berg next.
Hello.
Hey, Laura, how you doing?
I'm okay. So I tried the glossa today. It's a fresh first draft that's sure to evolve, and I found it quite challenging because I don't usually write long poems and they're long.
Yeah, I know, me too. That was the
Yeah,
problem.
so I really ended up putting a whole life in there.
You
So
know,
here's
what's
the
funny
life.
is as I was thinking about the form to do, I think something in Virgil's poem, I don't remember what, last week's guest reminded me of that poem by Dan Seuss. And I was thinking, oh, let's do a glossa about some kind of the future. And then when I pulled it up during the show last week, I was like, oh, wow, maybe glossa is not the form I remember because it's so long. and it ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but that's okay. It's a good exercise to write something longer. And really, I mean, I don't know. I mean, 40 lines isn't that bad, I guess. I used to write poems that long.
Well, so I ended up telling I used it as a narrative, but I think it's got too much language in it, so it needs to get pared way back. But in any case, here's what I did. I took a poem that Emily Dickinson wrote about a shipwreck, and I think like 40 people died in the wreck and only a few survived. And this was the final stanza of her poem. Then a silence suffuses the story, and a softness the teller's eye, and the children no further question, and only the waves reply. So here we go into the story. Scheherazade, my Kareem, wove me stories. Oh, just a second. That's the wrong version. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, my Scheherazade Kareem wove me stories in azure-tiled coffee shops. There was or there was not, he'd start, and next day to unwind an ending, starting anew, and I'd wait again. Then a silence suffuses this story as he vanishes. Student life in his land was no quad fest, pacing secret meetings, chain-smoking crystal cigarettes, hunger strikes, prison. One day he reappeared, thinner, and we started to date again, and laced into softness the teller's eye. Wed, flown, we became pretty birds in a prettier cage, our children in new clothes, bouncing through gardens, sun-filled days, luminous dusks. Tell us a story, they'd say. You board a ship, he'd say. What 3 things do you bring? The tale unfolds until eyes close, and the children no further question. Adults now, they've moved on. Some nights he'll still spin stories, new ones alive, filled with wild gods, oysters, golden threads, stars above and below, his dearest inner sea, as if he'd never left home. In fact, it gets harder to re-begin and to imagine endings. Yet he gives all this to me, and I'm ungrateful. Why? Only the waves reply.
Oh,
Okay.
I love that. The rareness of the rhyme really that's something I love about this form that I didn't realize. But that's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was Laura Berg once again with Naufrage, a glossa. So thanks so much for sharing that, Laura. And next, let's go to Nancy Tinnell.
Hey.
Hi, Nancy. I think it's your first time on, right?
Well, I watched last week,
Uh-huh.
but I was intrigued by the glossa form, and I had never even heard of it, let alone written one. But I decided to experiment, and because of the 10-line length of each stanza, it reads like a narrative, which I guess is good. But it's based on 4 lines from Gacela or Gacela de la Muerte Oscura by Federico Garcia Lorca. And I learned that the Gacela is ghazal or ghazal, the form we had just talked about. That's his poem in that form. So I wrote a glossa on his Gacela.
Ah, interesting.
The lines from him are, I want to sleep for half a second, a minute, a century. But I want everyone to know that I am still alive, that I have a golden stable inside my lips. And here's the glossa. What is done cannot be undone. Seconds become eternity. The end of the conflict lies somewhere this side of infinity. Death gave our poet-prophet peace and endless sleep, while we are left with chaos and threat. I, night's watchman, know that sleep beckons, but it would be dangerous to acquiesce, abandon my post when so much is at stake, to close my eyes on what must be reckoned. I want to sleep for half a second, to receive relief from this evil that robs us of freedom. Oh, how we need to have you with us, to hear your words, your thoughts expressed. If we could see you once again, even briefly cheat death of its victory, we would be encouraged by your strength. Our cause would be upheld, our hope revived. If only we could bring you back to our reality, a second, a minute, a century. We would ask you to give to us, embed within us your wisdom. Allow us to speak with your voice. Or let me be there and you here. You could say to them, you thought I was gone, that my message did not survive, that the people would give up without me, that they would fall to the ground in submission, that help for them would never arrive. But I want everyone to know that I am still alive. You could say to us, listen, good people, keep working for your liberation. Use my voice, my poetry, my plays to speak against all injustice. I leave them as my legacy. Launch them like an armada of ships. Resist the forces that are holding you down. My words will resound like thundering hooves. They will know when their empire is held in your grip that I have a golden stable inside my lips.
Oh, that is another excellent use of the form. I'm really liking this glossa. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nancy. Yeah, that was Nancy Tunnell with glossa. And let's go next to let's go to Lucy Chow, who is usually toward the end, but she's on a little early and has a glossa.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, Lucy, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing very great, and this glossa form turned out to be such a hidden treasure for me because it seemed to have unlocked something in me that went quite amok with forms, and I actually came up with a double glossa.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so
Yeah.
let me So what was your inspiration for it?
I drew 2 sets of 4 lines from Wallace Stevens's Sunday Morning, because the luxurious rhythm of that poem was truly mesmerizing, and I seek to achieve something similar with my glossas, and I also find that Wallace Stevenson's vision of poetry as a secular religion very, very. I'm imagining our deep future with something that Stevens proposes in that poem.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear it.
Double glossa on deep time. The sky will be much friendlier than now. A part of labor and a part of pain, and next in glory to enduring love, not this dividing and indifferent blue. They shall know well the heavenly fellowship of men that perish and of summer morn, and whence they came and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. Wallace Stevens. 1. And trees shall bear witness to its becoming, in their woods billions of negative shapes, undistorted by our clock's maddening pace. The vectors of their striving after more life shall be sidelines along which boughs build life-sustaining telescopes of time. They shall again have had grown old and wise, skin lettered with lichen, whom it takes centuries to bloom. Moths shall murmur how the sky will be much friendlier than now. Where shall we be, and in what life form? Our souls shall have served their sentence in human bodies and passed on. In the light at an iris's heart, or in the water drops sluicing down a needle of a balsam pine, we shall flit and flash prismatic in crystals of rain. Or be deer and gazelles cropping wild yarrow while holding on to memories of past guilt, of breaking hearts and taking lives in vain, a part of labor and a part of pain. The work of soul is to stay awake, the labor of body to keep house for her. Simple truths we shall come to understand when left alone with these two, when the old chaos of the sun has worn fancy ceiling thin. Hummingbirds shall nest with our dead hair in the alcove, charm themselves invisible and daydream. We have a daily labor of caring for a garden of milkweed and verbena, saffron, mauve, and next in glory to enduring love. Where and how shall we have buried the grief of children gone into dark woods, of woods themselves, Bambi and his mother? What words of man on graves decked with plastic flowers can survive extreme weather and cosmic rays, and when species are gone still bear true? Will the future return to the past when stars are reverently read and transcribed in earth to summon spirits ever lucid and new, not this dividing and indifferent blue? 2. So we shall not ascend feather to heaven, shed our terrestrial anchors like the birds of paradise we once imagined without feet and could only roam evermore in clouds. Perhaps we shall not be lifted high enough even to touch a ruined church tower's tip. Is it possible on evolutionary scales to walk like Fata with Zon to the road's end, so floating up towards the crescent lip, they shall know well the heavenly fellowship? Will it be for only the chosen innocent few to embark on this quest athwart the field, at the farther side of which dangle down fire-fangled feathers from the empyrean?
Are you there, Lucy?
And when remembering in dim dreams an earthly chirp, will they water the alien corn with tears, whose salt will poison its roots and bring them culmination? Perhaps they will reach and rest at the bourne of men that perish and of summer morn. Or maybe wake up to find monarch wings sprouting from their scapulas, feelers itching in their temples, black and orange, striping their cheeks like shadows of trees on the golden forest floor. Extinct butterflies using them to stage a comeback show. Their brains shall be recrudescent pods of milkweed, each old neural fiber silvered silk, whose woof they have to read to know whence they came and whither they shall go. Deep future might be a monarch chrysalis found inside a phoenix's downed feathers. Its many strings, if unraveled, will reveal the cosmos as a vast, continuous mycelium. Every star a breathing being, a fruiting body rooted ephemerally to the eternal mesh. They shall traverse every one of its threads and see each pendant gem mirror their eyes. That heaven and earth co-create an Indra's net, the dew upon their feet shall manifest.
Oh, that was great. And beautiful descriptions as always, Lucy. Yeah, great poem, great use of that form. I'm really liking that. I really love the way that the rhymes pull through and sort of surprise you. You kind of forget that there's a rhyming component. And then that last couplet especially, with the echo of the sixth line, it really works well. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Tim. Good night.
Yeah, good night. That was Lucy Chow with Double Glossa on Deep Time. Let's go to Katie Dozier next. I know she has a shorter. So we've seen the double glossa. Now let's go to the glossette and see what Katie's got for us. Hey, Katie.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thanks for the beer.
You're welcome to be here.
So you have a glossette, and tell us what that form. I think you made it up, but you might not be the first.
I think you partially made it up, actually. I think it was you kind of made it up because I was like, I don't think I can write a stanza that's 10 lines. It's just not my style. And now, of course, I feel like an idiot. We've listened to like 20 awesome glosas now. So I didn't do that. I did a glossette. And I added additional rhyme to it, though, as you'll probably see, because it doesn't float in the background as much as it does when you're dealing with a 10-line stanza, it turns out. So this is after I used a poem that we read on the Poetry Space, which was Silence by Billy Collins. And I love this poem. I've read it a bunch of times, so I figured, why not go with this? So this is Sound, a glossette after Silence by Billy Collins.
Okay.
The first I ever heard must have been my own cry. Pastel paper slicing at the hospital walls, my pink cheeks ripe with knitted fury. The white, a silence that had piled up all night until the storm of that sterile cloud exploded. Through the squeak of so many doors, I floated, the lightning crack of a book, the footsteps of a mouse, like snow falling in the darkness of the house, turning the pages of Goodnight Moon, the hours I slept alone in the green room, baby sat by flowers. My bedfellows were books I piled up, asleep, unheard, the silence before I wrote a word, and then the wake-up cry, a just-lit match, striking sparks on the flint of my first tooth, snatched these flying pages, the crib gone in a new moon, how a room must be plowed, and the poor silence now.
Oh, that's great. The glossette. And Nate Jacob says, isn't the glossette a kind of candy?
It is now. Do you want to market it, Nate Jacobs?
There you go. Trademark. Yeah, you got to trademark that before someone takes it. Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Katie, for sharing that and introducing us to a new version of a new form. And also, we should mention Katie is the co-host of the Poetry Space with me over on Twitter. On Thursdays, I'll be flying back to California. But Katie's going to be doing an open line. So if anybody doesn't get enough of their open line fix right now, find Katie's Twitter for the Poetry Space open line. You can just search for the Poetry Space anywhere, too. That's Thursday at 3 p.m.
Your glossettes, both your candy and your poems. That's the plan. Yeah.
Well, perfect. Well, thanks, Katie.
Right.
Appreciate it. An excellent poem.
Thanks very much.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
That was Katie Dozier with Sound. And let's go next to Deb Tenenbaum.
Hello.
Hey, Deb, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. I'm really feeling quite humbled by all of these.
I know, me too. I mean, mine was an abject failure. I got halfway through it and then just it was like crashing into a wall. But everybody else made it through with beautiful poems. So I guess that's a lesson in life and humility for me.
Well, what happened to me, I guess, is as usual, I didn't pay full attention. So my stanzas have 8 lines, not 10. Yeah. And I didn't do a rhyme scheme, but I'll throw it at you anyway.
Yeah, well, it sounds good. And, as long as a poem comes out, I should always say, and I think I do, but as long as a poem comes out of it, I don't care if we follow the prompt or not. And so I'm glad we got one. Okay.
And I watched this most recent critique of the week and then this weekend. And I'm also doing mine off a poem called Silence, but it's by Kate Dunbar, who had submitted her poem for critique of the week, and it sort of stayed in my head. So I was inspired by that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, let's hear it.
And I like the way Katie highlighted the lines. I have mine at the end. And should I read them first, though? That was another.
Yeah, why don't you read the quote so we know? Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. All right. This is from Silence by Kate Dunbar. When we daydream, we draw on the chemicals that are released when we sleep. Mere seconds can feel as if days have passed, as bodies become disengaged and disoriented. It is a rare condition, at most an inconvenience, but some have a twist within that allows deeds to be done, leaving no knowledge of the event in the memory of the day walker. I may be one. Mm-hmm. And so, those who swallow stones. Sometime during childhood, they fall asleep, lose interest in waking to a social fabric that doesn't fit. It sags at the waist, constricts at the knees, nothing worth keeping. So they daydream, drawing on chemicals released while they sleep. Time stutters, adult-imposed routines that drag, spliced with fast-forward sprints that leave the day walkers out of step. They trip, sprawl flat on the asphalt, skin their chins. Seconds can feel as if days have passed, as bodies become disengaged and disoriented. They take cover inside the folds of fields, fade into faint facsimiles. Imagine a clock whose sweeping hands gradually deface. It is rare, but some have a funny twist within that allows delicate deeds to be done, leaving no track in the memories of the daywalkers. They hold slow to life, swallow stones, grow old without traction, erase careless lines, sow ease within silence. Do they hurry towards death or yearn to return to a time before birth, to be undone, to rewind themselves into ghosts? It's eerie to speak of them. I may be one.
Yeah, beautiful poem, Deb. That's really wonderful. That was To Those Who Swallow Stones, a great title too. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, definitely. Great poem. Yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know what we're referring to, that is the critique of the week, which I guess if you're watching this, but maybe you're new to the Rattlecast, we do a critique every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And so if you go to rattle.com/critique, you can find the submission window to submit your poems up for critique if you'd like to have that done. And last week we did a two by Kate Dunbar, and one was Silence, which had just so many great lines. It's an interesting mind for poetry there by Kate, and pulls some lines from that poem. So thanks for pulling us back to that, Deb. And let's go next to, I want to go to Nate Jacob. There's Nate. Hey, Nate, how you doing?
Hey, good evening. I'm always surprised to hear my name.
Well, you're here now. So what do you got for us? Did you do the prompts?
I wrote a glossa.
So, the thing is, I was like, gosh, this is going to be such a frustrating prompt that no one's going to actually do it. And, like, everybody's done it. So I guess it goes to, like Bruce was talking about, challenge yourself, make it hard. I guess maybe that dictum works.
It was hard. I tend to write away from an idea, and writing towards the final line of those four stanzas was a challenge.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Actually, that was kind of my difficulty too. Was trying to get both to get the syntax around her weird, but then also knowing I had a target made it. It's a totally different process for writing.
Yeah, it was hard. But I have a we'll see. I don't know.
Okay.
It's based on 4 lines from Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I did not choose a poem. I've been reading a lot of Cormac McCarthy since he died. Mm-hmm. And it's from The Road. It's people were always getting ready for tomorrow. I didn't believe in that. Tomorrow wasn't getting ready for them. It didn't even know they were there. And my poem's titled Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, and Grandpa. The day came and went, and no one even noticed, as though lightless sunrise led directly into sunset, and nobody looked up wondering where Tuesday went. Tuesdays didn't matter to anyone anymore, apparently. It simply had none of the cachet of Wednesday, hump day, with that tummy tickling bottoming out, leading us all into the best day of the work week, Thursday, he claimed, when everyone worked harder to get the weekend started ahead of time before the calendar could notice. People were always getting ready for tomorrow. One would think that a personal philosophy shared by a grandfather to his granddaughter over his very best specialty, a no breakfast of waffles and semi-softened vanilla ice cream, topped as well with the syrup of his homeland, would be as sweet as the meal, sappy even. Instead, this 4-year-old angel with the blondest halo was darkly warned against every imaginable danger, as though simply by warning her, he had saved her. I never scared my kids straight. I didn't believe in that. But for the old man, wrapped tight in fear and mistrust, there was rarely enough of every today for him to adequately concern himself with everything gone mad in the disintegrating light of yesterday. much less time to stew and to hem and haw over the promise of darkness to come tomorrow. It was as if tomorrow was forever looming above and ahead, an omen in and of itself, like some vulture circling the skies, measuring his and our future corpses. Tomorrow wasn't getting ready for them, nor for us. Tomorrow wasn't even aware of him, not at the moment, because tomorrow never looks back, neither to today nor to yesterday, a fact that left the old man more upset, flummoxed and flabbergasted, he would say, that there was simply no measurable future in living if the living was to be so fraught with every danger that he could imagine, confirmed by the radio men whose messages were clearest when the skies were darkest. Tomorrow wanted nothing to do with their messaging. My daughter agreed. Tomorrow didn't even know they were there.
Oh, yeah, great character sketch kind of poem there. Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, and Grandpa by Nate Jacob. Really love that. The poems are just coming out outstanding. Thanks for sharing that, Nate.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And that feels like, it could be the start of a novel or something, or a novel in verse, something too. Very interesting. Well, thanks for sharing that, Nate.
Thank you.
Yep. This is Nate Jacob with Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, and Grandpa. I should say, by the way, for those who are new, if you want to, after you read your poem, you can jump back to YouTube or Facebook, and then you can see the poem too. It's kind of better watching than Zoom, although Zoom does have a little chat window, which is fun as well. Let's go next to Bishwajit Mishra. Also has a glosa for us.
Good evening, Tim. How are you?
Good. How are you, Bishwajit?
I'm good, thanks. I'm overwhelmed by the poems.
I'm really impressed today, I gotta say.
Yeah, I got a glosa, but I can tell you, I dished the meter. I'm not good with that, so no pentameter. And it's not explicitly futuristic, but there is a concept of future, because this kind of conversation can happen somewhere in unforeseeable future. Mm-hmm. And I extended my last week's poem.
Okay, interesting. Okay. That sounds good. Oh, Axiom of the Outsider, originally published in Rattle, way back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called Choke Cherry Tree 2, Lamentations, a glosa. They're, in fact, the last days of your spent youth. These are, in fact, the last days of your spent youth. Look at the tattered map, if you must. Those lines converging can only spell trouble. The road ahead turns as dark as your days. Virgil Soares from Axiom of the Outsider. My curiosity got better of me when I looked at your empty state, shriveled out. But I could have been better off trying out an app that projects looks backward and forward of people, because seeing the contracted state and the expanded space around you and your neighbors was like donning of a suit, of the smallness of the frosted three-storied houses and spaciousness's overwhelming inherence. I thought, while you kept depreciating, losing your last tooth, these are in fact the last days of your spent youth. Is it that you return to being static like the wind when breeze winds, or like immobility of the sky before the rains? Who can think you're going to come back again, to keep growing every day, every moment, reversing from the inertness of the dead, as from hibernation of bears burst, as though you surrender to the snow, letting it play on you, as though your surrender to the snow, letting it play on you, gets winter to keep you embalmed to resurrect, which in winter seems hard to trust. Look at the tattered map, if you must, and tell me, who lives linearly, how do you keep being born again and again in the same life, in the same world as mine, and not get tired? What do you do inert or fruit? Do you remember that experience, which should be no different from a near-death one, when you dig out of the rubble, like a Buddha passing through the hourglass of karma, like concentric circles where nothing must stick. So you anoint yourself with an oily detachment without rumble. I wonder if those lines converging can only spell trouble. Dear choke cherry tree, one more thing and you can enjoy your summer. What is that which you preserve locked behind winter's chill? Brahma, Tao, soul, or whatever else different from a seed, as each seed only gets one chance, a lottery ticket for one evening? Or is it like a two-runner relays, one passing the baton to pick up later for another lap under lights? Then you are a sage with no risks of entrapment in stones in such strange ways that the road ahead turns as dark as your days.
Oh, that was great too. Just another perfectly done glossa. Choke Cherry Tree by Bishvijit Mishra. I love, Virgil Suarez. I know he was watching. I saw him comment on Facebook. So hopefully he's still watching. But the cool thing, I love the glossa because it feels like, you have those lines and then it's almost like the poem of yours is like hidden inside. I think of like string theory. There's like 3 dimensions, but then there's secretly hidden 8 more dimensions. And that's like other poems sticking out of those lines or something. It's a really neat form for that reason, kind of, and similar way to the golden shovel. But very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Bishvijit.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I do. I hope Virgil's still watching, so we got to see that. Maybe I'll drop him a note just in case.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, next up, let's go to Dick Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick. How you doing tonight?
I am just overwhelmed with this evening of poetry. The interview.
I know. The thing is, too, I thought the open lines poems are just so great. I really didn't think people were going to be writing a lot of glossas, and that's why I put Ernie in here. I thought we'd have a short open lines because there wouldn't be many inspiration from the prompt, and instead we have a whole bunch.
They are entrancing, and to follow up the the interview, which that's an interview I'm gonna go back and replay. There's just so many little points in there that I just want to savor.
Yeah, and Bruce is a great poet. I was really looking forward to this one for a while because I've been a fan of his work for, as long as I've been a fan of poetry, I think.
Well, great poet and no accident, just really thoughtful about the work. I just loved it.
Mm-hmm. So what do you have for us? Is it a?
I said it was Poets Respond poem. I sent you a revised version. In the open lines.
Gotcha. So we get a break from the form. And what's the inspiration for this one?
Let's see. You said there were 2 primary prompts for this week. One was climate change, and one was cluster bombs.
Yep, cluster bombs and climate change. It was like it was the choice of the 2. And we've had a lot of climate change poems, so I went with the cluster bomb. That was one of the things I was thinking about. But yeah.
This is a climate change poem.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is definitely. It's hot here. It's hot everywhere. That's for sure.
It's a. It was, the 3 things. My daughter lives in Vermont. It's a mess where they are. Flood. You didn't read the news?
No, I didn't.
Vermont has had historic floods, prehistoric floods. Let's say, just unbelievably destructive. The water in the Florida Keys is over 96 degrees.
Wow.
And my nephew lives in Palm Desert where it's 120 degrees.
Yeah, that's although that I can attest is every year. Palm Desert. I go down there sometimes just to experience the insanity of actually surviving and existing there.
Well, Death Valley hit a record, and so it's, and of course, there are floods and heat waves all over the world. These were just the ones that I read about. So here we go, and this is it's called "There Once Was a Story Other Than This," with excerpts from the Book of Dread. And if you'll scroll down to the end, you will see the Book of Dread is a newly unearthed scriptural codex of the climate crisis. Authorship of this text is currently attributed to the fictitious 17th century ancestor of poet Dick Westheimer.
Well, that is a complicated conceit. Very interesting, Dick.
Yes. So there are, you'll have to like accept that conceit for this poem to maybe work, if it works. Epigraph is from Carl Sagan. Billions of years from now, our sun will have reduced Earth to a charred cinder, but the Voyager record will still be largely intact in some other remote region of the Milky Way galaxy, preserved as a murmur of an ancient civilization that once flourished. And the people folded their hands in prayer and asked to be given names instead of rain, but all they got was rain. Our daughter calls. Their road has washed out. They're okay, but the neighbor's barn's swept away and the sheep are mud-hooved and hungry. The people cowered in fear as the heat lay upon them like a funeral shroud, and they prayed for rain instead of names. Out in California, my nephew's power is down, and it's going to be 120 tomorrow. He loves his house and his little town, but his partner is dying in the heat, and he's got to go. He has nowhere to go. The windless seas began to roil like a cauldron under a Shi'ad spell, and the people cried out in despair. Down in the Keys, my sister says the water's too hot to swim in. They just rebuilt from the storm. Now she's wondering why. After 7 years of plenty, the gods sent omens, boiling seas, great floods, a vision of hell, creatures of earth and sky coming undone. The people ripped at their raiments, but paid no heed. Here, a squirrel lays prostrate on the blacktop, limbs splayed. Quiet as a stalking cat, he peers into the vine-tied thicket. Nearby, a robin has pressed its breast against the same pavement, stares into the same green tangle. And one man was righteous, blameless in his age. The God bade him to save his people from their wickedness. We're each on different cave-dark decks of Noah's Ark, smudged and squalling with creatures of our own kind. Noah at the helm knows there's no place to moor. There never has been. The dove is flown and not returned. The raven speaks to the old man in riddles. Noah cocks his head and nods, reaches his knurled hands to the sky and tumbles from the gunwales into the ceaseless waters. The rest of us, oblivious in the hold of the drifting ship, at last recall our names. And the God despaired, said to the people, save the smallest part of you, give it to a child, so that she may remember what once was good. Our names are revealed to us as hope in the old stories we tell again and again until they are etched into us like grooves on Voyager's golden record. The survivors will hold these tales as the Ark holds us, to tell their children's children, so they may know there once was a story other than the fall.
Oh, yeah, that was, as someone said in the comments, that was an epic poem, Dick. There once was a story other than this, with excerpts from the Book of Dread. And I think I remember that submission. I think you didn't have the Book of the Dread as a part of there, did you?
I had the Book of Dread. It was a different title, book of something else. Mm-hmm. But I was out on a run today, and I thought, I'm going to have this character write a whole book of the Book of Dread.
Well, that's very interesting. Well, thanks for sharing that. The debut of the Book of Dread. Very interesting, Dick.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
So Dick Westheimer once again. Let's go to Alan Harvey next. Hey,
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Though my responses for last week's prompt, the multimedia.
Right. The multimedia poem. Okay, so.
Though I hope it's not too tricky for you to show.
Let's see. Where did you send it here? Let's see. Let me pull it up. I don't see it on the email. Did you send it?
I went through submissions on the website.
Oh, it's on. Okay, well, that's a different place, but that's okay. So you sent it. Well, I'll just type in. Let me see. We'll find it. So explain what you did, and I'll try to find it as you go.
Well, actually, you're the inspiration for what I did.
Interesting. Okay.
I remember you saying when you get haibun submissions, you go straight to the haiku first and decide if it's worth reading the rest of it. So I've created an artist book. It's currently on exhibit at the University of Puget Sound.
Oh, wow.
And the text is on the pages, but the haiku is actually hanging from like a mobile in the
oh, wow,
center
this is
of the
amazing.
page.
Oh my gosh, I'll put it on screen. And again, if you're just watching, if you're on the Zoom, you should go over to you should go over to YouTube so you can see what we're actually looking at. But this is it. This is the book A Nocturnal Journey, Haibun and Linked Haiku by Alan Harvey. And then we see the book here with on a little like a mobile popping out, like it's like a pop-up book. That's amazing that you managed to do that. Is the haiku popping out of the text? That's really neat, Alan.
So I hope you're able to display just by scrolling down. But
yeah, I definitely can. So why don't you go ahead and start reading them, and whatever you'd like to read, and I'll share.
Nocturnal Journey. There's an ancient wisdom we learn from the darkness of the night. Creation was born out of darkness. The darkness we fear is just part of our Creator's handiwork. No longer alone, Blue Moon. There is safety in the privacy of the night. We can drop pretense and presumption. It's a gestational period. The beginning of life represents safety in its watery environment. Full moon, tightrope walking between pole and pine. Darkness is a time of regeneration and reflection. We turn our minds over to the subconscious. Light pollution washes out the night sky. We are cut off from the marvels of the night. Pine tree is lifting its candles. Crickets in the dark. Heading to college as a young man and crossing Montana in the depths of night, I stopped at a rest area in the middle of nowhere. It took a minute to reach the restrooms, for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Glancing upwards, the spectacle of the heavens above made me gasp. Dark eyes, even in full moonshine, captured in the shadows. The Milky Way was spread out across the sky, and there were more stars than my imagination could reckon. The nighttime sky was painted with a cosmic paintbrush. Moon shadow of mine permitted to cross the raked gravel. There's a complexity at work here that goes beyond human ingenuity. What guiding hand developed complex proteins with different sequences to do different jobs in biological systems? Gravel pathway leading to the thin place, no longer.
Oh, wow. That was really cool, Alan. And so say it again, where this is on display, where you can find this book. I assume it's one of a kind.
Yes. It's our group is putting on exhibit at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. So it's in the library right now.
Yeah, that's really neat. Yeah, very cool. Thanks so much for sharing that. And it's neat to know I inspired something that neat.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That was Alan Harvey with this mixed media book of Haibun, Nocturnal Journey. Thanks for sharing that, Alan. Let's go next to let's go to Audrey Friedman.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Audrey. And we are at the time we usually end the show, but we'll just keep going and make sure we get everyone on the Zoom. This is the first time we've made it to 2.5 hours and still have Zoomers, but we want to keep it going. So how are you doing tonight, Audrey?
I'm wonderful. So yes, I took the challenge. I took some text from Rick Jackson, who I adore. Had the privilege of studying with him for a short time at Vermont College. I did cheat a little bit. I didn't rhyme, and I altered some of his line breaks to better flow with mine.
Sounds good. A loose glossa.
That's it. A cheater.
I just call it loose.
Okay. After such rain, the sunflowers stand like mops. There were warnings, of course, a spinning weather vane, knuckled clouds that flanked the harbor, the whole sky swaying like a coat on a nail. Richard Jackson. Cumulonimbus, heavy, pregnant. Its water breaks and comes in menacing floods. Limbs crack, assaulted by gusts and lightning forks. After such rain, the sunflowers stand like mops, considering their pithy stems still are intact and rooted. Any of us can snap, find our heads pillowed by soft mud. Nothing of the limp aftermath truly surprises us. There were warnings, of course, a spinning weather vane. Splintered ghost boats, scarred pearls that mark the horizon line. The sunflower is not the only victim. We ought to have listened to the black and menace, to knuckled clouds that flanked the harbor. How does one anchor himself, brace his brittle back, shield himself from the vortex inside his own home, where he fears breaking like the sunflower, the whole sky swaying like a coat on a nail?
Oh, that is really wonderful. That gloss after the Richard Jackson poem. Thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, really, the glosses are just great tonight.
Fabulous night.
Yeah.
Thanks for the challenges.
Yeah, they definitely are, but people rise up to it. Now let's go to Zachary Honeycutt next. Hey, Zachary.
Hey, Tim. How's it going, man?
It's going great. It's a late night, but a fun one. So what have you got for us?
Yeah, it's awesome tonight. So, I decided to be a total narcissist tonight and use one of my own poems and do a gloss.
Well, there's always one in the group.
I hope you guys remember a little poem I read a while back called The Fox Feet.
Mm-hmm.
I took it from a stanza from that, and I actually don't have the whole thing. I did half of it. I'm going to read the first half tonight and the first half next week because I want to just button up some things, but I like the first two stanzas.
Well, why don't we just do the why don't we do the quote and then we'll do the whole poem next week while we have more time?
Oh, you want me to? Oh, I wanted to read tonight. Oh. I wanted to read it. I was looking forward to it.
Okay, we'll do that next week. Let's do this. Let's do the glossa from the start, and then we'll read that next week.
Wait, so what are you saying?
I'm saying do the glossa. Do the glossa. Yeah,
that's what I want to do.
Yeah, start with the epigram though. Don't read the whole other poem.
No, I'm not going to do it. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so this is from The Fox Feet. This is the lines I used from The Fox Feet. I did barren and dry in a desolate place. There lives a creature with a snarling face. Its yellow eyes shine like the sun as they glide down from where they hung. And so these are the first two stanzas. And by the way, this is kind of like I went down the post-apocalyptic route, so this is dreadfully, dreadfully cheerful.
Yeah, well, that's where I meant the prompt to go, but then I didn't want to have a whole open lines full of post-apocalyptic poems, so I thought that was a last-minute edit.
You got one here. So, the year and date I cannot place, when sky and cloud gave way to waste, and ash when man destroyed the human race. And every nation ceased to clash, and birds and fish and lifeless bodies piled up streets quicker than trash, and left no space for cars and times to pass. And the beguiled, who thought that they were doing right, were left, like a child well bereft of Jacob's water's grace, barren and dry in a desolate place. They came across a desert not just of sand, but of ideologies, dead gods that could not speak or lend a hand, false religions that tried hard but could not stand in the soft sand and cracked, decayed glass seas. And hard luck stories abound and fill up this space, where faith in God diminishes, and still, where people are too good to get down on their knees. Robots that build robots rusting in this rotten place, and yet there lives a creature with a snarling face.
Oh, that's a great line for the last line. I'm looking forward to hearing the whole of the Fox Feet poem too, Zach. It's always a pleasure to hear the cadence of that meter and rhyme that you've got there. Thanks for sharing it, Zachary.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Tim. See you guys next week.
Yep, see you next week. So Zachary Honeycutt with his glossa of the Fox Feet, which we'll hear next week. So tune in, don't miss it. Let's go next to Emily DeFerrari. Hey, Emily, are you there? Oh, we gotta unmute you. Can you unmute? Oh, she can't unmute right now. Let's go instead to Stephen Horrell, and then we'll go back to Emily in a second. Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
Hi there. This has been an amazing evening. Like, you nailed me on everything between Vietnam, and I was raised out just in Philadelphia. We used to go to the Jersey Shore. So,
oh, wow.
anyway,
it's weird how the world works out. This was your episode. Thanks for inspiring it.
This poem I'm going to read tonight, I haven't been able to read it in public, so I'm probably going to have to think of doing laundry before I get done it.
Interesting.
Anyway, okay. It's called No One Can See You. The moon ghosts its way through the afternoon. The air folds and drops its secrets, a swirl of invisible skirts. Once there was a boy throwing baseballs, the strike zone clearly marked. Is it always so? You were in the hospital again, and no one can see you. Apparently, we can reach the other side, as they call it, without going anywhere. I am contemplating asparagus, going wild at the river's mouth. You are walking through the marsh grass, breaking off young spears. We are both laughing. And I am back in the field again, weeding the rows of tomatoes always longer than I think. You came back from the kayak trip where your gloves stopped, your wrists were sunburnt. Wrists so red like you'd been scalded, still tasting of salt. When you get there, will we be on the same side? Will we recognize each other? Will the darkness be eternal just for us? The ringing in my ears at night, a dog barks. The magic of fireflies, bats are jagged pieces of cloth. The ringing is all about possibility. I thought we would grow old together. We already have, you said. You are in the hospital again and no one can see you. Our daughters think I should see a therapist. In the warm fur of dreams, shadows drop at my feet. Your absence, the thread so fine, the needle so deep.
Oh, that's a beautiful. I love that ending, and I love that drops its secrets, a swirl of invisible skirts, and then the baseball reference too. Great poem, Steve. I really like that.
I thought you'd like the baseball
I always do.
reference.
I always like a baseball reference. I cannot lie. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, by the way, I just wanted to mention that has been, I meant to mention this earlier, that's been accepted by Hanging Loose.
Oh, excellent. I love Hanging Loose. One of the older magazines out there.
Yeah, it is.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
I was also in Hanging Loose 12 in 1970.
Oh, wow. That's
and then
really cool.
I haven't written for decades.
Yeah.
I've written, but haven't sent them anywhere.
Yeah, I got you. Well,
Anyway,
thanks so much for sharing that one.
Great
Steve.
evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. That was Steve Horrell once again with No One Can See You. And next, let's go to, we have a couple people left. Let's go to Emily DeFerrari again. Let's see if we can unmute. I think she did, just as we were saying, to move on. Hey, Emily, how you doing?
I'm good. And glad I've heard that you're good too, because I know you've been asked already.
So what have you got for us?
So I have a pseudoglossa.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it was supposed to have rhyme. I didn't realize it was supposed to have meter. So it doesn't have that. And it's 5 lines instead of 10 because I knew there were going to be a lot of long poems tonight, so I made mine short.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you. So this is My Titanic. Interesting. And from the Neruda.
Yeah. So the lines, it's from Dead Gallop by Pablo Neruda. And the lines are, like ashes, the seas peopling themselves in the submerged slowness, in the shapelessness, or as one hears from the crest of the roads, the crossed bells crossing.
Yeah, that's great.
I will tell you this, your boat will not be remembered. Boats carrying crystal and soft velvet like jewels in a heavy sky are remembered. But boats that carry plastic water bottles and blue tarps are as forgettable as your begging tongues. Like ashes, the sea peopling themselves, the waves roil and rise and crash one into the other. None of these things will be remembered. They will ebb into hidden ports, become stagnant, carry wet rind beaten from fragile paper, and floating downward, tangled alphabets will sink in the submerged slowness, in the shapelessness of our consciousness, addicted as we are to the fineness of the china, the smooth, cold feel of heavy silver in our mouths, the painful loveliness of violins that are compelled to be played as lifeboats leave with empty seats, or as one hears from the crest of the roads, roads with no tire tread, no boot marks, roads calling us, look here, look here. We see beyond the major chords, pick up your tempo, clang, call back the lifeboats, clang, grasp the rope, clang, pull them in, fill every seat, and more. Do not ignore the clang of the crossed bells crossing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Great, great glosa of the Neruda, pulling beauty out of beauty there. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks.
Yeah. That was Emily D. Ferrari with a wonderful glosa, My Titanic. And now we're left with 2 marks, last but not least. Let's go to Mark Grenier next. Hey, Mark.
Hi, Tim. How's it going? Wonderful evening tonight. Lots of really good glossa poems. And I didn't try one myself, but I will now.
Yeah, well, as you know, I don't blame you. So,
yeah. Anyway, some really good stuff tonight, and wonderful interview too.
Well, thank you. So what do you have to share with us?
This is a poem called Ode in My Body Swimming, and I sent it in because of the poem about swimming that from the book of the second poet you had. I forget his name right now.
Okay, let me try to pull this up. You emailed it?
Yes, I
did. There we go. I find it. Okay.
Ode in My Body Swimming. The water is cool when I enter it. It streams like breath against skin. As I pull my arms down and through, propelling my weight across the pool, I am swimming through bubbles, the air escaping my lungs. My heart beats strongly as I move. I am pushed by the rhythmic metronome of feet beating time, time stretching back toward years when muscles of youth and strength propelled me between blue walls, tucked me into a quick flip turn and away, back to the memory, lost in fat and age, lost in years of stasis writing and editing, managing, making a living for my family. As I grew older and years slipped by, experience wore those supple joints into arthritic pains, tired legs and hands that can no longer be trusted not to slip from tools or cups, or even from my favorite pen tonight as I try to write this ode in the fat carcass where I live. I am slowly dying from diabetes or heart disease, COPD or COVID now, as others have died before me. But I will not go easily into that light at the end of all that is for me, that light on the wall like a train coming on, beamed into breath, rattling and shaking like a fearful thing, no longer bubbling out to slip on past the end of me, the end of time, spent.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. Was Ode to Swimming, was that the title?
Ode in my body swimming.
In my body swimming. Yeah, I couldn't pull it up. I looked at an old poem, actually. I didn't actually get it, but we got to listen. It was a beautiful poem. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was Mark Grunier with Ode to My Body Swimming, I think he said. Yeah, thanks so much. And then Mark Freiberg is next to last but not least.
Thank you. Takes a heck of an evening to get me up this past
oh, that's
bedtime.
right. Yeah, it's late for you.
I'm propping my eyes open here, but this is from last week's Poets Respond. A bit about environment, maybe development, fireflies in particular that have been in the news because they're disappearing so rapidly, especially to my wife who grew up with them. And it made me think, when we lose these little creatures, these beautiful, mysterious things, we're not just losing part of the ecosystem, which of course is awful. We're losing part of our lives. And at least Laura got a flicker of one last week.
Yeah, we saw a bunch. Me and Katie were in Kentucky during the Haiku North America, and there were a whole bunch out there at the cemetery too. We were visiting at dusk. It was amazing. But stay tuned for my Sciku is all I'll say.
Okay,
so a little bit more about the insects actually, and part of that. But let's hear the Dear Firefly.
Okay, Dear Firefly. Reappeared after too many years. Where have you been? Light dancer, tiny bright phantoms rising, disappearing, completely, forever. On each summer's back porch, a weighted curtain rise, beautiful, amazing, mysterious to child's eyes. Reawakened last night, sitting with my daddy, our farm, warm, sticky breezes, the smell of cows, the setting sun.
Beautiful picture there, and a very important topic. Dear Firefly, Mark Freiberg. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Thanks for staying up late for me.
Yeah.
Guys.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for staying up late with us.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye. That's Mark Freiberg with that Dear Firefly. And that's going to wrap up the open lines, I believe. Let me do one more check. Yeah. Okay, so we're good now. And as I was saying, that was like a perfect transition, like a plant in the audience, but not. It was just a random poem that came up. But I have actually, weirdly, this is a bad week for it, but I had two Sciku, and I wasn't sure which one to do. And since we're staying late anyway, maybe you can pick which one you like better. But the first one that seems to be prompted by Mark is based on this article right here. This is, I'll try to get on the screen for everybody watching still. This is, one second. You can shrink it a little bit too. Get the whole thing on. They like the huge screen sizes now. Okay, so air pollution particles may be a cause of dramatic drop in global insect numbers. And so like Mark Freiberg was talking about just a little bit, insects seem to be disappearing. And I'm not sure about the validity of measurements of that, how we can quantify that. But just anecdotally, it does seem like you drive across the highways of the world, or at least North America, and your cars used to be covered in bugs, and now they're not. And that creeps me out and bothers me more than really any other environmental thing. The idea that that's the bottom of the food chain that everybody feeds on. So the birds that fall off that, and then all the animals eat the birds, and the pollination and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, what these researchers did at the University of Melbourne was they took some flies and they exposed them to particulate pollution, particulate matter in the air, and then they checked their mating and how well they mated, and they had to sort of go through a little maze to find their mate or find food, or actually find pheromones from their mate or find food. And the ones that were exposed to the pollution for like 10 minutes, it wasn't even long, couldn't find their mate. It was 50-50 whether they got to the end of the maze or not in the right way. The ones that were the control group found their mate like every time, so they could smell with their little feelers. So it turns out that the air pollution might be the drop in insect numbers. They can't find each other if their antennae are coked with pollution. And so here's my little Sciku based on that right here. Two antennae cloaked in smog, failed marriage. Two antennae cloaked in smog, failed marriage. That is our one Sciku. Then I have a second one. And so you can tell me which one you like better if you're still watching the show. The other one, because I was kind of debating between which one, and then both haiku popped into my head, and I thought, well, why not? The other one is right here. Similar, environmental news. Here we go. This is out of MIT. Study, the ocean's color is changing as a consequence of climate change. The color changes reflect significant shifts in essential marine ecosystems. And basically, they can look at the oceans. You can't see the difference with the naked eye, but if you measure different wavelengths of light by satellite, you can see that the oceans are actually changing, becoming less blue as there's some kind of shift in the plankton, which you can measure and quantify that, even though you can't really see it with the naked eye. But the oceans are becoming less blue, it turns out. And because it's happening so fast, it really can't be anything but the increasing temperature. And so there is another climate change story for you right there. And the Sciku that inspired is this one. See if you like this one better. Ocean blue, a little deeper after you. Ocean blue, a little deeper after you. That is your second Sciku. Everything rhymes, so that's just the way we're going today. But I hope you enjoyed those. I hope you enjoyed this show. Now, we're going to go to next week's prompt really quickly. And we talked about prose poems, with Bruce Weigl, what seems like a while ago now. His newest book, I'm drawing a blank on the title. The Alms After the Alms? Let me see. What is it called? It is called Among Elms. That's the word. Among Elms in Ambush. His newest book is a book of prose poems. And so we thought we'd do a prose poem ourselves. And so the prompt for next week is this. Write a parablistic prose poem. Include at least one animal. So write a prose poem that is a parable of some kind, and include one animal. That is your prompt for next week. And next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be... It is going to be Sasha Stiles. So you probably know Sasha Stiles if you are a subscriber to Rattle. Sasha was interviewed in the Summer Tribute to NFT Poets issue. Sasha is just one of the preeminent NFT poets. She's got fascinating things to say about AI and poetry. Her book, Technology, uses an AI that was trained after her own writing and her own notes to create sort of an alter ego that she goes back and forth with in these poems. She's also written poems using a different AI. Really fascinating stuff. Her book is sort of like a textbook on what's going on for NFTs, so that's why we interviewed her. We're going to have her on as a poet guest, sharing a lot of poems. Rattlecast number 203, the regular time with your prose poem parables. And that's going to be next week. Rattlecast number 203, Monday, July 24th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Good night.